They found her in the snow, blue lips cracked open mid-scream, wrists bound with electrical wire that had frozen to her skin. The kind of death meant to look accidental. The kind that whispered nobody cares. But Damien Voss cared. Not about her life, but about the insult. Someone had dumped a body in his streets without permission, without tribute, without fear. That was the real crime. So he cut her down, carried her bleeding into the shadows, and made a choice that would crack his empire wide open. He let her live. Join us for this story until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The winter that year came with teeth. Not the gentle kind that nipped at your nose and made you pull your coat tighter, but the kind that bit down to bone and didn't let go. The city, this nameless sprawl of concrete and ambition, where everyone knew the rules but nobody spoke them aloud, had seen colder nights, but not many. The kind of cold that made metal contract and glass crack. The kind that killed the homeless in their sleep and froze the pipes in buildings rich enough to know better. Damien Voss walked through it like he owned the temperature itself. He did, in a way. Owned the cold. Owned the streets it settled on. Owned the fear that kept people indoors when the wind started howling through the gaps between high-rises. His footsteps on the icy pavement made no sound. Expensive leather soles, custom-made, the kind of shoes that cost more than most people's rent. Black wool coat that fell to his knees, tailored so precisely it might as well have been painted on. No hat, no scarf, just dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes that had stopped pretending to be warm about 15 years ago. Behind him, 3 steps back and 2 to the left, walked Marcus Chen, bodyguard, enforcer. The kind of silent presence that made smart people cross the street. Marcus didn't speak much, never had, but his hands, scarred knuckles, broken and reset more times than anyone could count, said plenty. He carried a gun under his jacket. Everyone knew that, but he rarely needed it. The hands were usually enough. "Streets are quiet," Marcus said. His voice came out in white clouds that dissipated fast. "Too quiet," Damien replied. It was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, the dead zone between Monday's hustle and Wednesday's grind, when the city should have been at its lowest ebb. But there was quiet, and then there was wrong. This was wrong. The usual sounds were missing. No distant sirens. No late-night delivery trucks. No cats fighting in the alleys. Just wind and the tick-tick-tick of ice forming on power lines. They'd been walking for 20 minutes, making rounds through the Northside territory, Damien's territory, though no map would ever show it that way. No deed, no contract, no official anything, just understanding. The kind of understanding that came from consistent application of consequences. The bars paid him, the clubs paid him, the dealers paid him. The high-end brothels that pretended to be massage therapy establishments paid him. Even some of the legitimate businesses, the ones that wanted certain permits to go through smooth, certain inspections to come back clean, they paid him too. It was a simple system. You operated in his territory, you paid the tax. You didn't, and very bad things happened very quickly. Most people paid. The smart ones, anyway. Damien had built this empire over 20 years, starting from nothing. Well, not nothing. He'd had ambition, ruthlessness, and a particular gift for reading people's weaknesses. Also a body count that would have impressed a small war, but that was just business. Details. Ancient history. Now he was respectable. In that way that power makes you respectable whether anyone actually respects you or not. Politicians shook his hand at fundraisers. Police captains accepted his charitable donations. Journalists who knew what was good for them wrote about his legitimate business interests and ignored the rest. "Something's off," Damien said, stopping at the corner of 5th and Brennan. Marcus scanned the street, hand drifting toward his jacket. "Yeah." They stood there in the freezing dark, 2 men who'd seen enough violence to fill a library, and waited for whatever was wrong to show itself. It did eventually. A sound. Faint, almost lost in the wind, but there. A kind of scratching, scraping noise. Like something trying to move but not quite managing it. Coming from the alley between the old Riverside restaurant, closed for 3 years now, waiting for some developer to buy it and gut it, and a pawn shop that had been in the same family for 4 generations. Damien tilted his head. "Rat? Big fucking rat marches society." Marcus said. They approached the alley mouth with the kind of casual caution that came from experience. Not rushing, because rushing got you killed. Not hesitating, because hesitation got you killed too. Just walking with purpose, ready for anything from a junkie to an ambush. The alley was dark, the kind of dark that city streetlights never quite managed to penetrate. Dumpsters on both sides, overflowing with frozen garbage. Cardboard boxes collapsed under the weight of ice. And there, about 15 feet in, something that didn't belong. A shape, human-sized. Not moving much, but not quite still either. That scratching sound again, nails on concrete, trying to find purchase. Marcus pulled his gun smooth and easy, like he was reaching for his wallet. Damien pulled a flashlight from his coat pocket, a small tactical one, the kind that threw a beam bright enough to blind. He clicked it on. The light hit her face and she flinched, turning away as much as her bindings would allow. Girl, young, maybe 25. Hard to tell with the blood in the cold. Dark hair matted with ice and worse. Face gone that blue-white shade that meant hypothermia was well past introduction and moving into the advanced stages. Duct tape across her mouth, hands bound behind her back with electrical wire, the plastic coating cracked and broken, the copper inside cutting into her wrists every time she moved. More wire around her ankles. She'd been dumped here, in the garbage, like something broken and finished. But she wasn't finished. Her eyes, brown, wide, terrified, locked onto Damien's, and in them he saw something that almost looked like hope. Wrong emotion for the situation. Hope got you killed slower than fear, but it still got you killed. Jesus, Marcus muttered, which was as close to surprise as he ever got. Damien crouched down, staying just out of her reach. Professional habit. Never assume someone helpless is actually helpless. How long you been here? She couldn't answer, obviously. The tape. She made a sound behind it, though, desperate, pleading. We calling it in? Marcus asked. Damien was quiet for a moment, thinking. Calling it in meant police. Police meant reports. Reports meant questions. Questions meant complications. And this was his territory, which meant whoever had dumped her here had done it knowing, or not caring, that they were operating without permission, without the tax, without the basic fucking courtesy of asking first. That was the insult. Not the girl. Not even the violence, really. Violence was just business, same as anything else. But the disrespect of doing it here in his streets, without acknowledgement, that stung. That required response. No, he said finally. We're not calling it in. He reached out and ripped the tape off her mouth in one quick motion. Better to do it fast. She gasped, sucked in air that probably hurt going down, cold enough to burn. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Please, she managed. Voice barely there, shredded from screaming or crying or both. Please don't. Who did this? Damien cut her off. No point in listening to begging. Begging was just noise. She stared at him, confused. Probably expected different questions. Probably expected him to be different than he was. I can't. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. Wrong answer, Damien said. Not angry, just factual. You saw who did this. You're going to tell me who did this. But first we're getting you out of the cold before you die and become useless. He pulled a knife from his pocket, folding blade, nothing fancy, just functional, and cut through the wire at her ankles. Her wrists would have to wait until they were somewhere with better light. The wire had cut deep enough that removing it here, in the dark, could end with her bleeding out faster than they could move her. Can you walk? She tried. Got about halfway to standing before her legs gave out. The hypothermia, or the shock, or just the simple fact that she'd been lying in freezing garbage long enough for her muscles to forget how they worked. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, steadied her with one hand while keeping the gun ready with the other. Safe house, Damien said. The one on Mockingbird. Marcus nodded. You sure? I know what it is. Damien stood, brushing ice from his knees. And I know what this is. Someone dumped a body in my territory without asking. Someone thinks they can operate here without consequences. That's a problem. She's the solution. She's a witness, Marcus pointed out. Exactly. Damien looked at the girl, who was staring at both of them like they were speaking a language she almost understood, but not quite. Someone wants her dead, which means someone's scared of what she knows, which means she knows something worth being scared about, which means she's valuable. He started walking back toward the street, expecting them to follow. They did. Marcus half-carried the girl, her feet dragging through the slush and garbage, making tracks that would be frozen solid within minutes. The safe house on Mockingbird was one of 4 properties Damien kept for situations that required discretion. Old brownstone, 3 stories, sandwiched between an accounting firm and a Vietnamese restaurant that stayed open until 4 in the morning. Nondescript. The kind of building you'd walk past 100 times and never remember. Inside, it was clean, maintained, stocked with supplies. Medicine, food, clothes, weapons. Everything you might need if you were hiding from the world, or hiding the world from something. Marcus had the girl on the couch within 5 minutes of arrival, wrapped in blankets, space heater blasting. Damien worked on the wires at her wrists with careful precision, peeling the metal away from torn skin, swabbing the wounds with antiseptic that made her hiss through her teeth. The cuts weren't as deep as they could have been, but they were bad enough. Probably need stitches. Definitely need antibiotics. "What's your name?" he asked while he worked. She was shaking, the hypothermia, the shock wearing off and leaving room for terror. Lena Cross." "Lena Cross," he repeated, like he was filing it away. "You work around here?" Yes, the diner, Joe's, on 7th. "I know it." Everyone knew Joe's, 24-hour place, mediocre coffee, decent pie. The kind of establishment that survived on location more than quality. "You a waitress?" "Yeah." "Good at it?" She blinked, thrown by the question. I guess? I don't know. I show up, I do the work, I go home." "Tips decent?" "What?" Damien finished with her wrists, started wrapping them in clean gauze. "Tips. You make good money?" No, not really. Why does it?" "Because I'm trying to figure out why someone would want you dead, Lena Cross." He tied off the bandage, neat and precise. "Military training, long time ago. Different life. You're a waitress at a 3rd-rate diner in a 4th-rate neighborhood. Not exactly a high-value target. So either you pissed off someone with more anger than sense, or you know something you shouldn't know. Which is it?" She pulled her hands close to her chest, cradling the bandaged wrists like they might fall off. I didn't do anything. I just worked. I just served food and cleaned tables and went home. That's all." Someone doesn't grab a nobody off the street and leave them to freeze for no reason. Damien sat back, studying her. "Someone thinks you're dangerous. I need to know why." "I'm not dangerous," her voice cracked on the word. "I'm nobody. I'm just trying to survive." Marcus appeared with a cup of something hot. Tea, probably. Shoved it into her hands. "Drink." She did, wrapping her fingers around the mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Maybe it was, from her perspective. Damien watched her drink, watched her hands shake, watched the color start to come back into her face. Shock was wearing off. Good. Shock made people stupid, made them unreliable. He needed her sharp. "Here's how this works," he said after she'd had a few sips. "You're alive because I decided you're worth more alive than dead. That decision isn't permanent. It's conditional on you being useful. So we're going to sit here in this warm room and you're going to tell me everything, every detail, every conversation you overheard at that diner, every customer who gave you weird vibes, every time someone tipped too much or too little or asked questions that seemed off. Everything. And if I think you're lying or holding back or wasting my time," he leaned forward, "then I'll dump you right back in that alley and let nature finish what someone else started. Understand?" She stared at him. The hope in her eyes had died somewhere between the alley and here, replaced by something colder. Understanding, maybe. Or just acceptance that she'd traded one kind of danger for another. "I understand," she said quietly. "Good." Damien settled back in his chair. "Start talking." She talked for 2 hours. At first it was halting, broken. The kind of nervous rambling that people do when they're scared and trying to fill silence with anything that might keep them valuable. But Damien had patience. He let her meander, let her circle back, let her contradict herself and correct and add details. Because somewhere in all that noise was signal, and he was good at finding signal. Joe's Diner, she explained, was the kind of place that attracted a certain clientele. Late-night workers, insomniacs, people who had nowhere else to be at 3 in the morning. But also, and this was where it got interesting, people who wanted to meet somewhere public enough to seem innocent but empty enough to have private conversations. I didn't pay attention at first, Lena said. She'd stopped shaking about an hour in, color fully back in her face now, though she still clutched the mug like a lifeline. I mean, you serve enough tables. You stop listening to what people say. It's just noise, background. But then I started noticing the same people. Same time, same booth, same order, every Tuesday and Thursday. 3 guys, always dressed nice, business casual. One of them, the older one, he always ordered black coffee and toast. Never ate the toast, just ordered it. Describe him, Damien said. 50s, maybe, gray hair, kept it short, clean-shaven, expensive watch. One of those ones that's just the right amount of flashy, Like he wanted people to notice, but not too much. He had this scar. She touched her own cheek, tracing a line from temple to jaw. Here, old scar. Faded. Damien and Marcus exchanged a look. They both knew who she was describing. Victor Hale, lieutenant in the organization. Reliable, smart, ambitious, in that careful way that made him useful instead of dangerous. Or so Damien had thought. What did they talk about? Damien asked, keeping his voice neutral. I didn't catch all of it. I wasn't trying to listen, I swear. But you hear things when you're refilling coffee or wiping down the next table. They talked about shipments, routes, numbers, lots of numbers, percentages, I think, and names, not full names, just first names or nicknames. Tony, Red, the Russian, Marco. Each name was a knife in Damien's gut. Tony Soprano, not the TV one, different guy, ran the docks. Red Wallace, who controlled the meth trade in the East Side. The Russian was Mikhail Volkov, arms dealer. Marco Dante, who had his fingers in prostitution, gambling, and a dozen other pies. All of them competitors, all of them rivals, all of them people Victor Hale had no business meeting with unless he was planning something stupid. When did this start? Damien asked. His voice hadn't changed, but Marcus had tensed, hand drifting toward his gun again. Maybe 2 months ago? 3? I don't know exactly. They came regular for a while, then they stopped about 2 weeks back. 2 weeks. Right around when Damien had started noticing certain inefficiencies in the operation. Small things. Shipments delayed. Information leaking to competitors faster than it should. Nothing big enough to raise alarms, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. And Damien always paid attention. Did they ever see you listening? He asked. No. I don't think so. I was careful. I wasn't trying to spy, I heard things. You can't not hear things when you're standing right there. But someone noticed. She nodded slowly. Last week, Thursday night, I was closing up. I work the late shift usually, and this guy came in. Never seen him before. Young, maybe 30. Nice suit. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee, didn't drink it, just sat there watching me clean. And then when I went to cash out my tips, he followed me to the back. Not obvious, just followed. What did he say? He asked if I knew who he was. I said no. He said I should forget I'd ever seen him. I said, okay. I didn't know what else to say. And then he left. She paused. But the next night, he was back. Different guy with him this time. They sat in a booth and watched me my whole shift. Didn't order anything except coffee. Just watched. And I knew, I don't know how I knew, but I knew they were checking. Seeing if I'd say anything, if I'd do anything. But you didn't. I didn't even know what I'd heard. Not really. It was just names and numbers. It didn't mean anything to me. Except it did. It meant everything. It meant Victor was building something on the side, using Damien's infrastructure and connections to cut deals with competitors. Playing both sides. And when Lena became a liability, someone who'd seen too much, heard too much, Victor or someone working for Victor had decided to handle it the permanent way. Sloppy, though. That was the thing that bothered Damien most. If you're going to kill a witness, you kill them clean. Make it look like an accident or a mugging gone wrong. You don't bind them with electrical wire and dump them in an alley like garbage. That was personal. Angry. The kind of kill that suggested whoever did it wasn't professional, just desperate. What happened after that? Damien asked. I left work Wednesday night around midnight. My car was parked 2 blocks away. I can't afford the lot, so I use street parking. I was walking, and I heard footsteps behind me. I walked faster. They walked faster. I started running. Her voice got quiet. I didn't make it far. How many? 2. One grabbed me from behind, put something over my face. Cloth, smelled like chemicals. I tried to fight, but she shrugged, helpless. Next thing I remember is waking up in that alley. Couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Just cold. Marcus spoke up for the first time in a while. They left you alive. What? Whoever did this, he continued, they didn't finish the job. You were bound and dumped, but not killed. Either they're idiots, or they wanted it to look like you froze to death naturally. Make it harder to trace back. Or, Damien added, someone screwed up. Someone was supposed to make sure you died and didn't, which means someone's going to be in a lot of trouble when their boss finds out. If that boss was Victor, and Damien was becoming increasingly sure it was, then yes, a lot of trouble, the kind that ended with shallow graves and missing person reports that never got filed. Lena looked between them, and something in her expression shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it was a harder edge. Anger, maybe, or just exhaustion. So what happens now? Now? Damien stood, stretched, his back cracked in 3 places, getting old, getting slow, though he'd never admit it out loud. Now you stay here. You don't leave. You don't call anyone. You don't exist until I say you exist. Marcus will stay with you. Make sure you have what you need. Food, clothes, medical supplies, anything you want within reason. And what are you going to do? He looked at her, this nobody waitress who'd stumbled into something way over her head and felt nothing. Not sympathy, not guilt, not even irritation. Just calculation. She was a piece on the board now. A useful piece, potentially, but still just a piece. I'm going to find out who tried to kill you, he said, and then I'm going to make them wish they'd succeeded. The thing about betrayal was that it always came from the inside. Enemies you expected, rivals you planned for. Competition was natural, healthy even, kept you sharp. But betrayal? That was personal. That was someone you'd trusted, someone you'd elevated, someone who'd eaten at your table and counted your money and sworn loyalty, turning around and spitting in your face. Damien had dealt with betrayal before, came with the territory. First time was 20 years ago, when he was still building the empire from scratch. Partner named Eddie Costa, good guy, solid worker, seemed loyal. Turned out Eddie was skimming, not much but enough to notice. Damien gave him one chance to make it right. Eddie tried to run instead. They found him 3 weeks later in a motel in Nevada, minus his hands and most of his blood. After Eddie, there'd been others. Maria Gonzalez, who'd sold information to the FBI. Tommy Two-Time Patterson, who tried to start his own operation using Damien's suppliers. Each time, Damien had dealt with it the same way, quick, brutal, public enough to send a message, but private enough to avoid heat from law enforcement. But Victor? Victor was different. Victor was family. Not blood family. Damien didn't have any of that left, hadn't for years. But the kind of family you built in this business. Victor had been with him for 12 years. Started as muscle, proved himself smart, moved up through the ranks. He ran the North Side operations now, managed the money, kept the peace. Damien had trusted him with everything. Apparently that was a mistake. He drove through the city as dawn started to break, Marcus next to him, city waking up around them. The snow had stopped, but the cold hadn't, and everything was covered in that gray-white frost that made the world look dirty and tired. People were starting to emerge, early shift workers, delivery trucks, the first wave of morning commuters. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that the man in the black sedan passing them controlled half the criminal enterprise in the city. You thinking what I'm thinking? Marcus asked. Depends. You thinking Victor's been selling us out for months and we missed it? Yeah. Then yes. They drove in silence for a while. Damien's mind was working through scenarios, possibilities, angles. If Victor was playing both sides, he'd have covered his tracks. Smart guys always did. The meetings at the diner were probably just the visible tip of something deeper. Conversations in encrypted apps, Money moving through shell companies, products redirected, information traded, alliances formed in the shadows. The question was, how deep did it go? Was Victor acting alone? Or did he have support inside the organization? How many others had been turned, bought, convinced that Damien's empire was past its prime and ripe for picking? And more importantly, how did you root out cancer without killing the patient? We need proof, Damien said finally. Can't move on Victor without proof. Not with his position. He's too connected. We go after him without cause. We split the organization. Half will think we're paranoid. The other half will wonder if they're next. So we get proof. Yeah, but careful. Victor knows how we operate. He's been part of it long enough. We go loud. He'll know and he'll run. We need to be surgical. They pulled up to a building on the west side, 8 stories, mixed commercial and residential. Looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. Damien owned it through 3 layers of shell corporations. Top floor was his. Office, apartment, armory. The kind of place where you could live and work and wage war from the same 4,000 square feet. Inside, past security that looked like building maintenance but carried enough firepower to stop a small army. Up the elevator that moved too slow and creaked too much. The penthouse was sparse, functional. Leather furniture, hardwood floors, windows that showed the whole city spread out like a map. Damien liked maps, liked being able to see the territory, mark the boundaries, watch the pieces move. He went to his desk, solid oak big enough to land a helicopter on, and pulled up his phone. Started making calls. First call, David Lee, who ran the financial side. I need transaction records for the last 6 months. Everything moving through the Northside accounts. Every penny in, every penny out. I don't care if it's legitimate or not, I want it all. And David, smart enough not to ask questions he didn't want answered, just said, when? Yesterday. I'll have it by noon. Second call. Angela Reyes, who managed information gathering. Former NSA analyst who'd gotten tired of government pay and government bureaucracy. I need surveillance on Victor Hale. Not obvious. I want to know where he goes, who he meets, what he says. Phone taps if you can manage it, physical following if you can't. That's going to be tricky, Angela said. Victor knows our methods. He'll spot a tail. So don't let him spot it. Use outside contractors if you have to. People he doesn't know. I don't care what it costs. How long? Until I tell you to stop. Third call. The one he didn't want to make but had to. Catherine Walsh, lawyer. Best criminal defense attorney in the city, which meant she'd kept Damien and his people out of jail more times than anyone could count. Hypothetically, he said when she answered, if I had evidence that one of my business associates was engaged in fraud and racketeering, what's my legal exposure if I handle it internally? Catherine was quiet for a moment. Hypothetically? Very hypothetically. Hypothetically, if you handle it internally in a way that involves anything illegal, you're exposing yourself to conspiracy charges, assault charges, possibly murder charges, depending on how internal the handling gets. My professional advice, hypothetically, is to bring the evidence to law enforcement and let them handle it. And realistically? Realistically? She sighed. Realistically, you're going to do whatever you're going to do, and I'm going to bill you an obscene amount of money to keep you out of prison afterward. Just try to minimize the body count this time. Dead people make for complicated legal arguments. Noted. He hung up, sat there in his chair looking out at the city. The sun was fully up now, weak winter light making everything look washed out and tired. Somewhere out there, Victor was probably having breakfast. Coffee and eggs, maybe. Reading the news, planning his next move, thinking he was safe, thinking he was clever, thinking he'd gotten away with it. He hadn't. But Damien needed to be smart about this. Rushing in angry was how you made mistakes. This required patience, planning, precision, the kind of careful dismantling that looked effortless from the outside, but took enormous effort behind the scenes. Marcus appeared with coffee. Real coffee, none of that diner swill. Turkish, thick and bitter, the way Damien liked it. What's the play? We watch, Damien said. We gather evidence. We build the case. And when we're absolutely certain, when there's no room for doubt, we move. And the girl? Lena stays locked down. She's our insurance policy. If Victor knows she's alive, he'll panic. If he panics, he makes mistakes. We let him think he's safe for now. She's not going to like being locked up. She's not in a position to like or dislike anything. Damien drank his coffee. She's alive because I allow it. That's the only reality that matters. Lena, for her part, was discovering that being alive came with unexpected complications. The safe house was comfortable, clean, warm. Everything the alley hadn't been. But it was also a prison, and she wasn't stupid enough to pretend otherwise. Marcus had made that clear within the first hour. Don't try the doors, they're locked from the outside. Don't go near the windows. They're one-way glass, bulletproof, and alarmed. Don't use your phone. You don't have it anymore. And even if you did, calls are monitored. Don't do anything except sit here and wait. So she sat, and waited, and thought about how completely fucked her life had become. 3 days ago, her biggest problem was whether she'd make enough in tips to cover both rent and groceries this month. Now she was being held in a safe house by a crime lord because she'd accidentally overheard conversations she hadn't even understood at the time. The universe, it seemed, had a mean sense of humor. Marcus sat in the corner, reading a book. She'd been surprised by that. Expected him to be the type who just stared at walls or cleaned guns or something equally intimidating. But no, he read. Actual books with pages and everything. Currently working through something that looked like a thriller, occasionally turning pages with the same hand that had probably strangled people. "Can I ask you something?" she said after the silence had stretched long enough to make her twitchy. He looked up, didn't say yes or no, just looked. "How long am I going to be here?" "Don't know. Days, weeks, months, however long it takes." "For what?" "For the boss to solve his problem." She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to find a position on the couch that didn't make her bandaged wrists hurt. "And what happens to me after he solves it?" Marcus went back to his book. "Don't know that either." "You're not very reassuring." "Not trying to be." "Fair enough." At least he was honest. Lena appreciated honesty, even when it came with an implicit threat of violence. She'd been trying to piece together what she'd stumbled into. The man who'd saved her, Damien, was obviously powerful, rich, connected. The kind of person who made one phone call and things happened. But he wasn't exactly benevolent. Wasn't saving her out of goodness of his heart. He'd been very clear about that. She was useful. A tool. The moment she stopped being useful, she became expendable. Which meant she needed to stay useful. But how? She was a waitress. She served food and smiled and pretended to care about strangers' problems for tips that barely covered her bills. She had no skills, no connections, no leverage. Nothing except whatever information was in her head. Information she hadn't even known was valuable until someone tried to kill her for it. The older man at the diner, the one with the scar. Damien had recognized the description. She'd seen it in his eyes, the way they'd gone flat and cold for just a second before he'd locked it down. Whoever that man was, he was important. And whatever he was planning, it was bad enough to justify murder. "Marcus?" she said, testing the boundaries. He looked up again. "The man your boss is after, the one from the diner. You know him?" "Not your business." "It kind of is, though, since I'm apparently the witness who can identify him." Marcus closed his book with a snap that made her flinch. "Listen, you seem like a smart girl, smart enough to know when to shut up and keep your head down. So here's my advice. Do that. Don't ask questions. Don't try to be clever. Just stay here, stay quiet, and hope the boss decides you're worth keeping around when this is over. Because the alternative?" He tapped the book against his palm. "The alternative is you end up back in that alley. Only this time, nobody's coming to cut you loose. Understand?" She understood, loud and clear. "Sorry," she muttered. He went back to reading. Lena stared at the ceiling and wondered, not for the first time, if dying in that alley might have been the easier option. By noon, Damien had the financial records spread across his desk like an autopsy. Numbers didn't lie. People lied. Documents lied. Witnesses lied. But numbers? Numbers just sat there being true, cold and indifferent. And these numbers were telling a very specific truth. Victor Hale was bleeding the organization dry. Not obviously. Not in a way that would show up on casual inspection. But David Lee had gone deep, following the money through accounts and sub-accounts and shell companies, and the pattern was undeniable. Over the last 6 months, approximately $3 million had been redirected from legitimate operations into accounts that shouldn't exist. Small amounts, never enough to trigger alarms, but consistent, methodical. He's smart about it, David said, standing on the other side of the desk. Mid-40s, balding, wore glasses that made him look like a tax accountant instead of the guy who laundered money for a criminal empire. Uses the Northside construction contracts as cover. Inflates costs, pockets the difference, moves it through a series of LLCs before it disappears into offshore accounts. If I wasn't specifically looking for it, I'd never have noticed. How much total? Best estimate? Between 3 and 4 million over 6 months. Could be more if he's got channels we haven't found yet. Damien did the math. 4 million in 6 months meant 8 million a year. Not enough to destroy the organization, but enough to hurt. Enough to fund operations elsewhere. Enough to buy loyalty from competitors. Enough to start a war. Who else knows about this, he asked. Just me and you. I pulled the data myself, didn't delegate. Nobody else has seen it. Good, keep it that way. Damien gathered the papers, started organizing them into piles. Evidence, case, ammunition. I want you to trace where the money's going after it hits the offshore accounts. Find out who's receiving it, what they're buying, how it's being used. And I want to know if anyone else in the organization is involved. That's going to take time. You have 48 hours. David winced. That's not a lot of 48 hours, Damien repeated. Not angry, just firm. Victor's had months to set this up. Every day we wait is another day he's preparing for whatever comes next. We don't have time to be thorough. We need to be fast. Understood. David left, already pulling out his phone to make calls. Alone again, Damien leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. 20 years building this empire, brick by brick, body by body. 20 years of careful planning and brutal execution. And now one of his own had decided to tear it down from the inside. The betrayal hurt more than he'd admit. Not because he loved Victor, love was a luxury people in this business couldn't afford, but because he trusted him. Trust was currency. Trust was everything. Once it was gone, you were just left with fear and force, and those were temporary solutions to permanent problems. His phone buzzed. Angela. Talk to me, he said. Got eyes on Victor. He just arrived at a warehouse in the industrial district, east side near the old shipyards, meeting someone. Who? Can't tell yet. Our guys are positioned outside. You want us to get closer? Damien thought about it. The smart play was to wait, gather more evidence, build an airtight case before moving. But sometimes you had to trust your gut. And his gut was screaming that whatever was happening in that warehouse was the next piece of the puzzle. I'm coming to you, he said. Keep your distance, but maintain visual. I want to know everyone who goes in or out. Roger that. He grabbed his coat, checked his gun. Sig Sauer P226, reliable, familiar weight, and headed for the door. Marcus met him in the hallway. We moving? We're observing, Damien corrected. Victor's meeting someone. I want to know who and why. They took separate cars, standard protocol for situations that might turn hot. Easier to scatter if things went sideways. The drive to the industrial district took 20 minutes through traffic that was somehow both heavy and moving, the kind of paradox that only city driving could produce. Damien used the time to think, to prepare, to shift from businessman to soldier. Different mindset, different rules. The warehouse was exactly the kind of place you'd pick for a clandestine meeting. Abandoned, isolated, surrounded by other abandoned buildings that nobody cared about anymore. Graffiti on the walls, broken windows, chain-link fence that had seen better decades. Angela's team was positioned in a building across the street. Second floor, good sightlines. Damien joined them. 3 people. Angela herself, plus 2 contractors he didn't recognize. All of them had cameras with telephoto lenses, the kind that could count pores from 100 yards away. Status? He asked. Angela handed him a camera. Victor went in about 10 minutes ago. Black sedan, 2 bodyguards. They're still inside. No visual on who they're meeting, but there's 2 other vehicles parked around back. SUVs high-end. Damien looked through the lens. The warehouse doors were closed, but there was a window on the second floor, cracked and dirty, but still transparent enough to catch shadows moving inside. Any audio? Tried. Walls are too thick, ambient noise from the shipyard's too loud. We'd need to get a lot closer. Which they couldn't do without risking detection. Victor wasn't an idiot. He'd have people watching for tails, for surveillance, for anything out of place. They waited. Waiting was most of what this business involved, ironically. Movies made it look exciting, car chases and shootouts and dramatic confrontations. Reality was sitting in cold buildings watching doors that didn't open, hoping something useful would happen before your bladder gave out or your patience ran dry. 40 minutes later, the warehouse doors opened. Victor emerged first, talking to two men Damien didn't recognize. Both looked military, short hair, tactical clothing, the kind of posture that came from training and discipline. Behind them came someone Damien did recognize, Mikhail Volkov, the Russian. Arms dealer extraordinaire, currently under investigation by 3 different federal agencies and untouchable because half the intelligence community bought weapons from him when they needed things off the books. Well, Damien said quietly, that's interesting. Angela was already taking pictures. Click, 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 rapid fire, catching every angle. Victor shaking hands with Mikhail. The 2 military types loading boxes into the SUVs. Victor laughing at something Mikhail said. All of it evidence. All of it damning. What's he buying? Marcus asked, appearing next to Damien like he always did. Silent, sudden, vaguely supernatural. Don't know yet, but whatever it is, he's using our money to buy it from our competitor. Damien lowered the camera. Which means he's not just skimming, he's arming. Arming for what? That was the question, wasn't it? Victor had money, weapons, connections with rivals. He had inside knowledge of Damien's operations, his defenses, his weaknesses. All the pieces were there. The only question was when he planned to use them, or if Damien could stop him first. The meeting broke up, handshakes all around. Victor and his bodyguards got in their sedan and drove off. Mikhail and his people went the other direction. Angela's team documented all of it, every face, every vehicle, every license plate. Get me IDs on those 2 military guys, Damien said, and find out what was in those boxes. Call in favors if you have to, but I want to know what Victor just bought. On it, Damien stayed at the window after everyone else had filtered out, watching the empty warehouse, thinking. Victor had just made a very expensive purchase from a very dangerous source. That wasn't the move of someone planning to keep their head down. That was the move of someone planning something big, something violent, something that required Damien to be ready. He pulled out his phone, made another call. This one to James Rivera, head of security. I need you to quietly increase protection on all major assets, warehouses, distribution points, key personnel. Don't make it obvious, just add extra bodies. Tell them it's a precaution. Precaution against what? Against whatever's coming. I'll explain later. Just do it. You got it, boss. One more call, this one back to the safe house. Marcus picked up immediately. The girl's still secure? Yeah, she's fine, bored but fine. Good. Keep her that way. And Marcus? Increase the guard. I want 2 people on that building at all times, armed, alert. Nobody gets in or out without my say-so. You expecting trouble? I'm expecting smart preparation. There's a difference. He hung up. Stood there in the empty building, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and felt the familiar cold calculation settling into his bones. This was what he was good at. Not the violence. Anyone could be violent. But the strategy, the planning, the chess game played with lives and money and power. Victor thought he was building something. An empire of his own, maybe. A coup. A hostile takeover. He was wrong. What Victor was actually building was his own grave. He just didn't know it yet. Damien smiled, thin and cold. Then he walked out into the winter afternoon and started planning a funeral. The next 48 hours moved like a slow-motion car crash. You could see it coming, knew it was going to be bad, but couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. David Lee worked through 2 nights straight, surviving on coffee and prescription stimulants that probably weren't legal anymore. By the time he walked back into Damien's office, he looked like hell warmed over, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, the kind of exhausted that came from staring at numbers until they stopped making sense and then staring some more until they made sense again. I found where the money's going, he said, dropping a folder on the desk with enough force to make the lamp rattle. You're not going to like it. Damien looked up from the surveillance photos spread across his desk. I haven't liked anything about this situation. Why stop now? David sat down without being invited, which was how Damien knew it was bad. David never sat without permission. Victor's been funneling money to 5 different operations. 3 are fronts, legitimate businesses that look clean on paper but exist solely to move cash around. Standard laundering. Nothing interesting. But the other 2? He pulled out specific pages, highlighted in yellow. One is a logistics company. They run freight, mostly legal stuff, but they've got the infrastructure to move anything anywhere without raising flags. Perfect for smuggling. And the second? Private military contractor. Small outfit, maybe 20 guys, all former special forces. They hire out for security work, close protection, that kind of thing. But their client list is interesting, mostly warlords, dictators, people who need violence done professionally. Damien studied the documents. The PMC was registered in Delaware under a name that meant nothing, Sentinel Solutions Group. Clean paperwork, legitimate business license, tax returns that probably looked fine to anyone who wasn't digging deep. But the names attached to it were familiar, very familiar. 2 of them had worked for Damien 5 years ago before leaving to start their own thing. He'd let them go peacefully because they'd been smart about it, asked permission, stayed out of his territory. Apparently that courtesy hadn't been mutual. How much has Victor paid them? Total? About $600,000 over the last 3 months. That's not retainer money. That's operational funding. $600,000 bought a lot of violence. Enough to stage a coup, certainly. Enough to eliminate competition. Enough to start a war. Get me a meeting with them, Damien said. David blinked. With who? Sentinel Solutions. Tell them a potential client wants to discuss services. Use one of the shell companies, something that can't be traced back to me. I want to know what Victor hired them for. That's risky. If they're loyal to Victor, then we'll find out who's loyal and who's just collecting paychecks. Either way, I need intelligence. Damien closed the folder. Set it up for tomorrow, somewhere public, restaurant, hotel bar, somewhere with witnesses. They won't try anything stupid if there's collateral damage. David nodded slowly, already calculating the logistics. What about Victor? You want to move on him yet? No, not yet. Right now, he thinks he's safe. The moment we move, he'll know we're on to him. I want to know everything first, every connection, every plan, every contingency, then we move, all at once. No warning. And the girl, Lena? Damien had almost forgotten about her, which was stupid. She was the reason this whole thing had unraveled. Her and her bad timing and her unfortunate habit of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She stays locked down. Nobody knows she's alive except us. That's our advantage. David left with new marching orders and enough work to keep him busy for another sleepless night. Damien sat alone in his office as evening bled into night, the city lights coming on one by one like stars in reverse. He didn't feel tired, didn't feel much of anything, really, except that cold calculation that had kept him alive this long. Victor had made his move. Now it was Damien's turn. Across town, in the safe house on Mockingbird, Lena was discovering that boredom could be its own kind of torture. She'd read every magazine in the place, mostly old issues of Time and Newsweek, nothing recent, like they'd been left here years ago and nobody had bothered updating them. She'd watched TV until the same commercials started looping and she wanted to throw the remote through the screen. She'd slept more in 3 days than she normally did in a week, and still the hours dragged. Marcus had been replaced by a woman. Shift change, apparently. Her name was Rosa, and she was about as talkative as a brick wall. Mid-30s, compact, moved with the kind of efficiency that suggested military training. She carried a gun in a shoulder holster and didn't bother hiding it. "Can I at least go outside?" Lena asked on the 3rd day. "Just to the backyard or something? I'm going crazy in here." Rosa didn't even look up from her phone. "No?" "Why not?" "Because the boss said no." "The boss isn't here." "That's why I'm following his orders instead of making up my own." Rosa's tone suggested the conversation was over. Lena wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to do anything except sit here on this couch, in this safe house with nothing to do, and nobody to talk to, and no idea how long this was going to last. But screaming wouldn't help. Breaking things wouldn't help. She was trapped, and the only way out was whatever Damien decided. That realization sat heavy in her stomach. Her entire life, whether she lived or died, whether she stayed or went, whether she ever saw daylight again, was in the hands of a man who'd made it very clear she was just a tool. Useful for now, disposable later. Rosa, she tried again, softer this time. How long have you worked for him? For Damien? This time Rosa did look up, and there was something almost like pity in her eyes. Long enough to know that questions like that don't get answered. You want advice? Stop asking. Stop wondering. Just stay quiet and hope you're still useful when this is over. And if I'm not? Rosa went back to her phone. Then it won't matter what you hoped for. The meeting with Sentinel Solutions was set for noon the next day at a hotel restaurant downtown. The kind of place that served overpriced steaks to business travelers and tourists who didn't know better. Damien arrived 15 minutes early with Marcus in tow, picked a table near the back with clear sight lines to all exits, and waited. They showed up right on time. Professional. 2 of them, just like David had arranged. The first one Damien recognized immediately. Jack Morrison used to run security for the East Side operations before going independent. Late 40s, military bearing that hadn't faded even years after discharge. Scar across his left eye that he'd gotten in Kandahar or Kabul, or one of those places that all blurred together in memory. The second guy was younger, maybe 35, blonde hair cut military short, expensive suit that didn't quite hide the muscle underneath. Damien didn't know him, but he had the same look as Morrison, dangerous, controlled, the kind of man who could smile while breaking your fingers. Morrison sat down across from Damien with the kind of casualness that came from confidence. The younger guy stayed standing, hand hovering near his jacket. Marcus mirrored him from the other side of the table, 2 guard dogs sizing each other up. Mr. Voss, Morrison said, not bothering with pretense. Didn't expect to see you personally, thought this was a corporate inquiry. It was. Then I saw the company name and got curious. Damien leaned back in his chair. How's business, Jack? Good. Steady. We stay busy. I bet. A lot of people need security these days. Dangerous world. Getting more dangerous all the time. Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. You looking to hire, or is this a social call? Little of both. I'm curious about your recent contracts. Word is you've been doing some interesting work. We do a lot of interesting work. You'll have to be more specific. Damien pulled out his phone, brought up a photo, one of the surveillance shots from the warehouse, showing Morrison's partner loading boxes into the SUV. This specific enough? Morrison didn't flinch, didn't even blink, just looked at the photo for a long moment, then back at Damien. That's a client meeting, confidential. I'm sure it is. Question is, who's the client? Because if it's who I think it is, we're going to have a problem. No problem from where I'm sitting. We were hired to provide services. We're providing them. That's how this business works. And what services would those be? Can't discuss client details. You know that. But the younger guy shifted his weight, hand moving closer to his jacket. Marcus moved too, subtle but unmistakable. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Damien kept his voice level. Jack, I'm going to be very clear with you. I know Victor Hale hired you. I know he's paid you $600,000 over 3 months. I know you met with Mikhail Volkov at that warehouse. What I don't know is what you're planning to do with whatever you bought from him. So you can tell me now, as a professional courtesy between people who used to work together, or I can find out the hard way. Your choice. Morrison's jaw tightened. You're putting me in a difficult position. No, Victor put you in a difficult position. I'm offering you a way out. And if I take your way out, what happens to our contract? Depends on what the contract is for. If it's defensive work, security, protection, nothing happens. You finish the job, collect your money, we part ways friendly. But if it's offensive? Damien's voice went cold. If you're planning to hit my operations, my people, my territory, then that contract is void, and you and I are going to have a very different conversation. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing options, calculating loyalty versus survival, money versus longevity. Finally, he said, we were hired to secure a location and protect personnel during a transition of assets. What location? 3 warehouses, Northside District, Damien's warehouses, where he stored product, money, weapons, the infrastructure that kept the whole operation running. And the transition? Moving inventory from your control to alternative management. Alternative management being Victor. Morrison nodded barely. When? 6 days from now, Friday night. We were told your security would be light because of some event. Wedding, I think. Half your people taking the night off. There was a wedding. Tommy Giacomo's daughter, big Italian affair. Most of the organization invited. Damien had approved the time off himself, wanted to keep morale up, show he cared about his people's families. Victor had been counting on that, counting on Damien being predictable, sentimental, soft. And after you secure the warehouses, then what? Morrison looked uncomfortable. That wasn't part of our contract. We were hired for the initial action. What happens after, that's between Victor and whoever else he's working with. But you have guesses. I have guesses. None of them good for you. Damien sat back, processing. Victor was planning a coup. Hit the warehouses during the wedding, take control of the physical infrastructure, then probably move on the financial side. Accounts, holdings, legitimate businesses. Do it fast enough and brutal enough that by the time Damien could respond, the game would be over. Clean, efficient, professional. It might even have worked if Lena Cross hadn't overheard the wrong conversation and forced the whole timeline to accelerate. Here's what's going to happen, Damien said quietly. You're going to continue your contract with Victor. You're going to show up Friday night like nothing's changed. But when the time comes to move, you're going to stand down. You're going to let my people handle Victor and whoever he brings. You're going to stay out of it. In exchange, I'll pay you double what Victor's offering, and you walk away clean. No blowback, no consequences, no hard feelings. And if I say no, then you're picking a side in a war you can't win. Victor's finished, Jack. Whether you help him or not, he's done. Question is whether you go down with him. Morrison looked at his partner. Some silent communication passed between them. Then back to Damien. Double? Double. Plus a bonus if you deliver Victor's full operational plan. Everything he's shared with you. Timetables, personnel, contingencies. That's a lot of money. It's a lot cheaper than a war, and you know me, Jack. I pay my debts. Always have. More silence. More calculation. Finally, Morrison stuck out his hand. You got a deal. But if this goes sideways, it won't. Damien shook his hand, felt the calluses, the strength, the kind of grip that came from years of trigger discipline. I'll be in touch with details. Keep your phone on. They left. Damien and Marcus stayed, ordered coffee they didn't drink, sat there while the lunch rush came and went around them. You trust him? Marcus asked eventually. No. But I trust his greed, and I trust his survival instinct. He knows which way the wind's blowing. And if he warns Victor, then we move up the timeline and hit them both. But I don't think he will. Morrison's smart. Smart people don't go down with sinking ships. Damien's phone buzzed. Angela, talk to me. Got IDs on those military guys from the warehouse. Both former Spetsnaz. One of them's wanted by Interpol for war crimes in Chechnya. The other has outstanding warrants in 3 countries. Real professional killers. What were they moving in those boxes? Took some digging, but I got a source at the Port Authority. Shipping manifest says industrial equipment, but weight and dimensions don't match. My guess? Weapons. Probably automatic rifles, maybe explosives. How many boxes? 15. If they're packed tight, that's enough firepower to outfit a small army. Enough to take the warehouses. Enough to hold them against counterattack. Enough to turn Friday night into a bloodbath. Keep monitoring, Damien said, and get me locations on those Spetsnaz guys. I want to know where they're staying, who they're meeting, what they're doing every hour of every day. Already on it. He hung up, looked at Marcus. We're running out of time. Yeah. I need to see Victor, face to face, before Friday. That's risky. He might suspect. He already suspects something, or he wouldn't be moving this fast. But suspicion and certainty are different things. I need to look him in the eye. See how good his poker face is. Marcus didn't argue. He knew better. When? Tonight. Call him. Tell him I want to discuss the Northside numbers. Make it sound routine. And if he says no, he won't. He's too smart to refuse a meeting without raising alarms. He'll come. And when he does, I'll know exactly how much time we have left. The call went out. Victor answered on the second ring, all casual professionalism like nothing was wrong. Sure, he could meet tonight, 8 o'clock, the office? No problem. See you then, boss. Damien spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Went over the evidence again, memorizing every detail, every transaction, every face and every surveillance photo. He didn't plan to confront Victor tonight. That would be stupid, premature. But he needed to be ready, needed to know the truth so completely that when Victor lied, and he would lie, Damien would see right through it. At 7:30, he sent Marcus to check the office for bugs, cameras, anything that might compromise the meeting. At 7:45, he reviewed his gun, made sure it was loaded, chambered around, just precaution. He didn't think Victor was stupid enough to try something here, in Damien's own territory, but stupid happened more often than it should in this business. At 7:50, Victor walked through the door. He looked good, relaxed, well-dressed as always, expensive suit that probably cost 3 months of a normal person's salary. Hair perfect, shoes shined, smile confident. If Damien hadn't known better, he'd think Victor was exactly what he appeared to be, a loyal lieutenant, competent and trustworthy. "Boss," Victor said, shaking hands. His grip was firm, no sweat, no tells. "What's this about?" "Northside numbers looked off last month," Damien said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Wanted to go over them with you. Make sure everything's clean." "Everything's clean. I can walk you through the reports if you want, but I promise, it's all there." "I'm sure it is. You've always been thorough." They spent 20 minutes reviewing spreadsheets that Damien already knew by heart. Victor explained variances, justified expenses, pointed out seasonal fluctuations in revenue. All of it was technically accurate. All of it was lies wrapped in truth. The money was moving exactly where Victor said it was moving. It's just that some of it kept moving after that, into places Victor wasn't mentioning. Damien watched him the whole time, watched his hands, his eyes, the way he held his shoulders, looking for cracks, looking for nervousness, looking for anything that suggested guilt or fear or awareness that his whole world was about to collapse. He saw nothing. Victor was either the best actor Damien had ever met, or he genuinely believed he was going to get away with it. Maybe both. "Looks good," Damien said finally, closing the last folder. "Sorry to waste your time. I'm just getting paranoid in my old age." Victor smiled. "You're not old, and paranoia's kept you alive this long. I'd be worried if you stopped being careful." "True enough." Damien leaned back. "You going to Tommy's daughter's wedding Friday?" "Wouldn't miss it. You know how Italians are about family events. Skip the wedding, you're insulting 3 generations." "You're bringing security?" "Just the usual. 2 guys. Why?" "No reason. Just making sure everyone's covered. Big event, a lot of people. Want to make sure nothing goes wrong." "Nothing's going to go wrong," Victor said with absolute confidence. "It'll be fine." They talked for another few minutes, small talk, meaningless pleasantries, the kind of conversation people have when they're pretending everything's normal. Then Victor left, still smiling, still confident, still completely unaware that he was walking dead. Marcus appeared from the next room where he'd been listening. "Well?" "He's good," Damien admitted. "Better than I thought. Didn't crack once." "So what now?" "Now we finish preparing. We've got 6 days until Friday. That's 6 days to shore up security, position our people, and make sure when Victor makes his move, we're ready to cut him off at the knees." "You want to warn the wedding?" Damien thought about it. The wedding would have maybe 200 people. Half the organization, their families, civilian friends who had no idea what most of the guests actually did for a living. If shooting started there, it would be a massacre. But if he canceled or moved it, Victor would know something was up, would know his plan had been compromised, would change tactics. "No. Wedding goes forward as planned, but we move security around. Make it look normal, but beef it up. And we position teams near the warehouses, not obvious, not where Victor's people will see them, but ready to move the moment things kick off. This is going to get messy." "Yeah." Damien poured himself a drink. Scotch, expensive, smooth, going down. "It is." The next 3 days were a blur of preparation disguised as routine. Damien called in favors, moved people around like chess pieces, secured backup that looked like coincidence, extra security at the warehouses for inventory audit, additional patrols in the north side for community relations, more people at the wedding venue for family safety. None of it looked suspicious. All of it was calculated. He also made arrangements for Lena, though she didn't know it yet. If Friday went badly, if somehow Victor pulled off the impossible and won, she'd need protection. So Damien set up a secondary safe house deeper in the city with instructions for Rosa. If you hear gunfire, if things go wrong, you take the girl and you run. You don't wait for orders. You don't ask questions. You run and you keep her alive because she's the only witness who can testify if this all falls apart. Rosa had nodded, understanding the subtext. If Damien died, Lena became insurance. Proof of Victor's betrayal. Evidence for whoever took over the organization to use against him. On Thursday night, Damien went to visit her. Rosa let him in without comment. The safe house looked the same as it had days ago, clean, sterile, comfortable, but obviously a prison. Lena was on the couch reading a book this time. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the fear flash across her face before she could hide it. "Mr. Voss," she said, standing up too quickly, like a student caught sleeping in class. "Sit." He gestured. She sat. He took the chair across from her, same as he'd done that first night. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. She's been fine." "That's not what I asked." Lena met his eyes. Some of the fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Anger, maybe. Resentment. "I'm going crazy. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm ever getting out of here. I don't know if you're going to kill me the moment I stop being useful. So no, I'm not fine. But what does it matter? You don't actually care how I am." Damien almost smiled. There was the spine. Took her a few days to find it, but it was there. "You're right. I don't care. But I need you functional, and keeping you in the dark isn't helping that. So here's the situation. The man who tried to kill you is making his move tomorrow night. He's planning to hit my operations, take control of my territory. I'm going to stop him. It's going to be violent. There's a chance it goes wrong, and if it does, Rosa has instructions to get you out of the city. And if it doesn't go wrong, then it'll be over by Saturday morning, and we can have a different conversation about what happens to you." She absorbed that. "The man from the diner, the one I described, that's who you're talking about." "Yes?" "He worked for you." "He did. And now he's trying to kill you. He's trying to take what's mine. Whether he succeeds in killing me is still undecided." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. I might not answer." "Why did you save me?" "Really? Not the whole 'you're useful' thing. You didn't know I was useful when you found me in that alley. You could have left me there. Called the police, let them handle it. But you didn't. You took me yourself. Why?" Damien considered the question. It was a good one. He'd asked himself the same thing a few times over the past week, usually in the dead hours of the night when sleep wouldn't come and thoughts got too loud. "Because someone dumped you in my territory without permission," he said finally. "That's disrespect. I don't tolerate disrespect. So you saved me to prove a point. I saved you because the alternative was letting someone think they could operate in my city without consequences. Your life was secondary to that." Honesty. That's refreshing. She didn't sound grateful, just tired. "What happens if you win tomorrow? What's this different conversation we're having?" "That depends on what you want." "What I want?" She laughed, short and bitter. "I want to go home. I want my life back. I want to forget any of this happened, but I'm guessing that's not an option." "No, it's not. You know too much. You've seen too much. You can't go back to serving coffee at Joe's and pretend this was all a bad dream." "So what are my options?" Damien stood, walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, frozen, lifeless. "You disappear. New name, new city, new life. I can make that happen. Give you enough money to start over somewhere far from here. Somewhere nobody knows your face or your story. And the other option? There isn't one. Not if you want to live." He could feel her staring at his back, could imagine the wheels turning in her head, processing, calculating, trying to find an angle, a way out, anything better than what he was offering. "When do I have to decide?" she asked. "After Friday. If I'm still alive and Victor's not, you'll have 24 hours to choose. After that, the offer expires. And if you're not alive, then Rosa will take you somewhere safe and someone else will make you the same offer. Or they won't. I can't control what happens if I'm dead." He turned back to face her. She was still sitting on the couch, small and tired and trapped. 25 years old and her whole life derailed by bad luck and worse timing. Part of him, a very small part that he usually kept buried under layers of pragmatism and violence. felt something almost like sympathy. But sympathy was expensive. Sympathy got you killed. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day for everyone." He left without waiting for a response. Rosa walked him to the door. "She's tougher than she looks," Rosa said quietly. "Most people are. Doesn't mean they survive." "You think tomorrow's going to go bad?" "I think tomorrow's going to go exactly as planned, which means it's going to be bloody, fast, and final. Keep her safe until I call. If you don't hear from me by midnight, assume the worst and execute contingency." "Understood." Damien drove home through streets that should have felt familiar, but somehow didn't. Everything looked different when you knew violence was coming. Sharper, more fragile, like the whole city was holding its breath. He spent that night alone in his apartment, gun on the table, evidence folders spread around him like tombstones. Went over the plan one more time. Then again. Then a third time, looking for holes, for mistakes, for anything that could go wrong. Found a few, fixed them. By the time the sun came up Friday morning, he was as ready as he'd ever be. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. All that remained was waiting for Victor to step into it. And when he did, Damien would make sure the last thing Victor Hale ever learned was that betrayal had a price. And that price was always paid in full. Friday arrived with the kind of gray winter morning that made everything look washed out and temporary. Damien was awake before the sun made its half-hearted attempt at rising, going through his routine with mechanical precision. Shower, shave, coffee, strong enough to strip paint. He dressed carefully, dark suit, nothing flashy, the kind of thing you could wear to a wedding or a funeral without anyone asking questions. Both seemed equally likely today. Marcus showed up at 7 with breakfast. Neither of them would eat. Eggs, toast, bacon that had gone cold on the drive over. They sat at the kitchen table pushing food around their plates while going over final details. "Teams are in position," Marcus said, reading from his phone. 4 guys on each warehouse, dressed like maintenance, blending in. They've got eyes on all access points. "Morrison?" "Checked in an hour ago. Says Victor's crew is supposed to arrive at the warehouses at 9 tonight, during the wedding reception. That gives us, 3 hours after ceremony starts?" "About that. Victor's planning to make an appearance at the church, shake hands, play nice. Then he'll excuse himself early, say he's got business to handle. By the time people realize he's gone, the warehouses will be secured and we'll be dealing with a hostage situation." Damien nodded slowly. Classic misdirection. Show your face where you're expected, establish an alibi, then disappear while everyone's distracted. "He's bringing security to the wedding?" 2 guys. Same ones he always uses, Frank and Eddie, both armed, both loyal. "Loyal enough to die for him?" Marcus shrugged. "Guess we'll find out." The day crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Damien made calls, checked in with his people, verified that everyone was where they needed to be. Angela had eyes on the Spetsnaz contractors. They were holed up in a motel on the east side, waiting for their call to action. David had frozen all of Victor's access to the organization's accounts, but quietly, in a way that wouldn't trigger alerts until Victor tried to actually use the money. Small preparations, small safeguards, all adding up to a net that would close the moment Victor made his move. At 2 in the afternoon, Damien's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Mr. Voss?" The voice was accented, Russian, smooth as oil on water. "Mikhail Volkov." "I hope I'm not interrupting." Damien's hand tightened on the phone. "You have 5 seconds to explain why you're calling me before I hang up and add you to a very short list." "No need for threats. I'm calling as a courtesy. Professional to professional. We're not professionals together. We're competitors who haven't killed each other yet." Mikhail laughed, rich and unbothered. "Fair enough, but I thought you should know. Our mutual friend Victor has been asking me for more supplies, more men, more guns. He seems to think he's going to need them very soon. And you're telling me this why?" "Because I like my business relationships clean. Victor paid me for merchandise. I delivered. Transaction complete. But now he wants more on credit, promises to pay after he reorganizes his cash flow. That tells me he's planning something messy. Something that might not work out the way he thinks." Damien walked to the window, looked out at the city. "Still not hearing why you care." "I don't care about your internal politics, but I do care about getting paid. If Victor's about to do something stupid that gets him killed, I'd like to know before I extend him credit. So I'm asking, should I take his call when he phones me tonight? It was a test. Mikhail was trying to figure out which side of this was going to win so he could position himself accordingly. Typical arms dealer thinking. Always be on the winning side, or at least neutral enough to do business with whoever came out on top. Victor won't be in a position to buy anything after tonight, Damien said flatly. If he calls you, tell him you're all sold out. And if you've got any business with me you want to preserve, you'll make sure none of your people get involved in what's about to happen. The Spetsnaz boys I sold him? Already handled. Interesting. A pause. You know, I always thought you were more dangerous than Victor gave you credit for. He kept saying you were getting soft, sentimental, past your prime. Victor says a lot of things, most of them wrong. Clearly. Well, thank you for the clarification. I'll make sure my people stay far away from your territory tonight. And Mr. Voss, when this is over, perhaps we should talk. I think there might be opportunities for mutually beneficial arrangements. I'll consider it. That's all I ask. Good luck tonight, though I suspect you won't need it. The line went dead. Damien stood there holding the phone, processing. Mikhail was hedging his bets, making sure he stayed useful to whoever won. Smart, pragmatic. Exactly what Damien would do in his position. It also confirmed something else. Victor had been running his mouth, telling people Damien was weak, declining, vulnerable, building a narrative that would justify the coup, getting buy-in from competitors who might support a regime change if they thought it would benefit them. Big mistake. The moment you started telling people someone was weak, you better be ready to prove it, because if you couldn't, you just look like a liar, or worse, incompetent. At 4 o'clock, Damien got dressed for the wedding, changed from the dark suit to a slightly lighter one, charcoal gray with a burgundy tie. Added cufflinks that had belonged to his father, one of the few things he'd kept from that previous life. Checked his gun one more time, loaded, safety on, tucked into a holster at the small of his back where the jacket would hide it. Marcus appeared in an actual tuxedo, which looked bizarre on him, like putting a tuxedo on a tank. You look ridiculous, Damien said. I look respectable. Same thing. They drove to the church separately, different cars, different routes. Standard protocol. Never give someone an easy target. The church was old Catholic, stone and stained glass, and that particular smell of incense and old wood that all churches seem to have. People were already gathering, men in suits, women in dresses, everyone greeting each other with the kind of loud enthusiasm that came from knowing each other too well and liking each other just enough. Tommy Giacomo was there greeting guests, face red and happy, already a little drunk even though the ceremony hadn't started. His daughter Maria was somewhere inside getting ready, probably stressing about flowers or music or whatever brides stressed about. Damien had sent a generous gift, $10,000 in cash in an envelope that Tommy would find later, and didn't plan to stay for the whole thing. Victor arrived 20 minutes after Damien, right on schedule. He looked perfect, smiling, shaking hands, playing the loyal lieutenant role to perfection. His two security guys, Frank and Eddie, hung back near the entrance trying to look casual and failing. Both had the same tight posture that came from carrying concealed weapons in shoulder holsters. Damien watched Victor work the room, watched him laugh at jokes that probably weren't funny, watched him kiss Maria's aunt on both cheeks in that way that made old Italian women light up. Natural charisma. Victor had always had it. That ability to make people like him, trust him, think he was on their side. It was a good skill to have, right up until it wasn't enough. The ceremony started at 5:30. Everyone filed into pews, stood when they were supposed to stand, sat when they were supposed to sit. The priest droned on about love and commitment and sanctity in that way priests did, words that had been repeated so many times they'd lost any real meaning. Damien sat in the back, eyes not on the bride but on Victor, who was 3 rows up and absolutely engaged with the proceedings. At 6:15, Maria and her new husband walked back down the aisle to applause in a string quartet playing something classical and forgettable. Everyone filtered out to the reception hall next door, a big space with round tables and a dance floor and a bar that was already doing heavy business. Victor stayed for the first hour, drank champagne, made a toast that got genuine laughs, danced with the bride and then with Tommy's wife and then with a couple of other women who looked delighted by the attention. He was good at this, really good, If Damien hadn't known better, he'd think Victor was actually enjoying himself. At 7:30, Victor checked his watch. Casual, like he'd just remembered something. He said something to the guy next to him, Anthony something, ran one of the gambling operations, and headed for the exit. Frank and Eddie peeled off from the wall and followed. Damien gave it 2 minutes. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. Marcus was already moving, phone to his ear, talking to the teams. Targets mobile, heading to the parking lot. They reached the street just as Victor's car, black sedan, expensive but not flashy, pulled away from the curb. 2 more cars followed it. One was Frank and Eddie. The other was Angela's surveillance team. He's heading north, Marcus said, reading updates from his phone. Toward the warehouses. Everyone in position? Yeah, Morrison's team is ready to stand down. Our guys are in place. The Spetsnaz contractors are still at the motel. Angela's people confirmed visual 5 minutes ago. Good. Let's move. They took Damien's car, Marcus driving because Damien needed to think, to plan, to make sure every piece was exactly where it needed to be. The wedding reception continued behind them, music and laughter spilling out into the cold night air. Everyone inside completely unaware that outside, a war was about to start. The first warehouse was on the north side of the industrial district, a massive concrete structure that had been built in the 70s and looked it. Damien owned it through 2 shell companies and used it primarily for storage. Legal merchandise mostly, though there was a locked section in the back where they kept product that would raise questions if anyone official came looking. They parked 3 blocks away, out of sight. Marcus cut the engine and they sat in silence, watching the feed from Angela's surveillance cameras on a tablet. The warehouse looked quiet, empty, exactly like it should at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. Then Victor's car pulled up. He got out with Frank and Eddie, all 3 of them moving with purpose. Victor was on his phone talking to someone. A minute later, 2 vans arrived. The Sentinel Solutions crew, Jack Morrison and 9 other guys, all of them armed, all of them looking professional and ready. There's Morrison, Marcus said, zooming in on the feed. Keeping his word so far. So far? Another vehicle, an SUV this time. The back doors opened and 4 men got out. Eastern European, definitely military. Probably the Spetsnaz contacts, even though Angela had said they were at the motel. Either Angela's people had lost them, or these were different contractors. Neither option was good. Shit, Marcus muttered. How many does that make? 17. Victor's got 17 people about to breach our warehouse. Damien did quick math. He had 12 guys positioned around the building. Good guys, loyal guys, but they were there for surveillance and quick response, not sustained firefight. 17 versus 12 were odds that could go either way, especially if the opposition had military training. Call for backup, he said. Get everyone who's not at the wedding. I don't care where they are or what they're doing. I want bodies here in the next 10 minutes. Marcus made the call while Damien watched the tablet. Victor and his crew were at the warehouse entrance now, one of them working on the lock. Professional work, no smash and grab, just quiet, efficient breaking and entering. The lock gave way and they filed inside, weapons drawn, moving like they'd done this before. What's the play? Marcus asked. Damien thought about it. He could wait for backup, surround the building, force Victor into a siege situation. Clean, controlled, minimal risk. But Victor would have time to fortify, time to call for his own reinforcements, time to potentially hurt the hostages if he had any. The longer this dragged on, the messier it would get. Or he could go in now, hit them while they were still securing the building before they expected resistance. Fast, brutal, risky as hell. We're going in, he said. Now, with our numbers? Now, before they dig in, before they realize we're onto them. Marcus didn't argue. Just checked his gun, chambered around, and nodded. Your funeral. Hopefully theirs. They moved fast, crossing the 3 blocks at a jog, staying in the shadows, using parked trucks and dumpsters for cover. Damien's phone buzzed. Text from Angela. Backup ETA 8 minutes. Don't do anything stupid. Too late for that. They reached the warehouse from the east side, where a service door had been left unlocked by their people earlier. Damien eased it open, wincing when the hinges creaked. Inside was darkness cut by emergency lighting, dim yellow bulbs that created more shadows than illumination. The warehouse was a maze of pallets and crates stacked 15 feet high, creating corridors and dead ends. Perfect for ambush. terrible for visibility. Damien could hear voices ahead, Victor's people spreading out to secure the space. Someone was giving orders in a language that wasn't English. Russian, probably. The Spetsnaz guys. Marcus pointed left. Damien nodded. They split up, moving parallel down separate aisles, using the stacked merchandise as cover. Damien's heart was hammering, not from fear, but from that pre-violence adrenaline that made everything sharper, faster, more real. He heard footsteps. Close. Getting closer. He pressed himself against a crate, gun ready, breathing controlled. A figure rounded the corner, one of Victor's guys, young, nervous, sweeping his flashlight beam across the space. Damien stepped out and hit him across the jaw with the butt of his gun. The guy went down hard, flashlight clattering away, beam spinning across the floor. Not dead, not even unconscious, just dazed and hurting. Damien kicked the gun away from his reaching hand and kept moving. More voices ahead. Then a shout. Someone had found the guy he'd hit. The element of surprise was gone. "Contact! We got contact!" The shout echoed through the warehouse. Then the first gunshot, loud as thunder in the enclosed space, flashlighting up the darkness like a strobe. And then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Damien dropped behind a pallet as rounds chewed through the wood above his head, splinters raining down. He returned fireblind, 3 shots toward where he'd seen a muzzle flash, then rolled right and kept moving. Staying still got you killed. More gunfire, shouting, someone screaming. The warehouse had turned into a chaos of sound and light. Impossible to tell friend from enemy. Impossible to know who was winning. Damien caught movement to his left, spun and nearly shot Marcus before recognizing him. "This was a terrible idea," Marcus shouted over the noise. "Little late for criticism." They moved together now, working as a team the way they'd done 100 times before. Marcus went high, Damien went low. They cleared an aisle, found 2 of Victor's guys taking cover behind a forklift. Short firefight, brutal and close. One of them went down. The other ran. "Where's Victor?" Damien shouted. "Don't know. Haven't seen him." That was a problem. Victor was the target, the whole point. If he got away while they were stuck fighting his soldiers, this whole thing was pointless. Damien's phone buzzed. Text from one of his guys. "North entrance. Victor's trying to get out." "He's running," Damien told Marcus. "North side." They pushed that direction, moving fast, taking fire from 2 different positions but not stopping to engage. Let the backup handle the cleanup. Damien needed Victor. The north entrance was a roll-up door big enough to drive a truck through. It was halfway open, night air pouring in, and through it Damien could see figures moving. Victor and his bodyguards heading for the cars. Damien ran, burst out into the parking lot just as Victor was opening the sedan's door. Their eyes met across 20 yards of frozen asphalt. "Going somewhere?" Damien called out. Victor froze. Frank and Eddie both pulled their guns, but they didn't fire. Too exposed, too many angles, too much risk. Mexican standoff in a parking lot at 8:30 on a Friday night. "Damien?" Victor's voice was steady, calm, like they were having a business meeting instead of pointing guns at each other. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I bet you didn't. Where were you heading? Thought you'd take my warehouses and just drive off into the sunset." "It's not personal, just business." "Funny. Feels pretty personal from where I'm standing." Behind them, the gunfire inside the warehouse was dying down. Either Damien's people were winning or everyone was dead. Hard to say. Victor glanced toward the sound, calculating. "You can't win this," he said. "Even if you stop me tonight, even if you kill me right here, it's too late. I've got support, real support. Half your organization thinks you're past your prime. They're ready for new leadership." "Half my organization," Damien laughed, short and bitter. "You mean the people you've been buying with my money? The ones who'll switch sides the second they realize you're finished?" "I'm not finished." "Yeah, you are." Victor's hand moved toward his jacket. Not fast, not aggressive, just a slow reach. "We can work this out. We've known each other 12 years. That has to count for something." "It counted for something right up until you decided to put a bullet in it." Damien kept his gun steady. "The girl from the diner, Lena Cross." "That was sloppy, Victor. Really sloppy. If you'd killed her clean, I might never have known. But you didn't. You left her alive just long enough for me to find her, just long enough to ask questions." Something flickered across Victor's face. Surprise, maybe. or just resignation that the game was up. She didn't know anything, Victor said. She was just a waitress who heard too much. I had it handled. You had it handled so well, she's been in my safe house for a week telling me everything. Every meeting, every name, every time you sold me out. Damien took a step forward. Jack Morrison sends his regards, by the way. Told me all about your little plan. The warehouses, the wedding, the whole thing. He's inside right now making sure your hired guns stand down instead of getting themselves killed. Victor's face went pale. Morrison's a businessman. I offered him more money than you did. Simple economics. For the first time, Victor looked genuinely rattled. His hand dropped away from his jacket. Frank and Eddie both looked at their boss, waiting for orders that didn't come. So what now? Victor asked quietly. You kill me here? Make it quick? I should. Would be cleaner. Damien lowered his gun slightly, not holstering it, just relaxing the aim. But I'm not going to. You know why? Because you're worth more alive than dead. You're going to stand trial, not in court. I'm not that stupid. But in front of the organization, in front of everyone you tried to turn against me. You're going to confess. You're going to name everyone who helped you. Every dollar you stole, every deal you made, every lie you told. And when you're done, when everyone knows exactly what you did and how pathetic it was, then we'll decide what happens to you. And if I refuse? Then I shoot you right here and dump your body in the river. Your choice. Public humiliation or quiet death. Pick one. Victor was quiet for a long moment, weighing options, calculating one last angle. But there wasn't one. He'd lost. The coup had failed before it even started. All that was left was deciding how to die, fast or slow, private or public. Fine, he said finally. I'll talk. Smart choice. Damien gestured with his gun. Marcus, secure him. Marcus appeared from the shadows, zip ties in hand. He bound Victor's wrists behind his back while Frank and Eddie watched, not moving, not helping. They were smart enough to know when their employer had stopped being worth dying for. You too, Damien said to them. Drop your weapons and walk away. You're unemployed as of now. If I see either of you again in my territory, we're going to have a different conversation. They dropped their guns and walked. Fast. Not running, but not strolling either. Inside the warehouse, the gunfire had stopped completely. Damien's phone buzzed. Text from Angela. Building secure. 6 hostiles down, 3 captured. Morrison kept his word. Your guys are shaken, but alive. 6 down. That meant 6 people dead. 6 bodies that would need to be disappeared. 6 families that would wonder what happened. 6 loose ends that would need to be tied. Not clean, not smooth, but done. Backup arrived 3 minutes later. Cars pulling up, guys pouring out, too late to help, but just in time to clean up. They looked at Victor in zip ties, looked at Damien, looked at the warehouse door where smoke was still drifting out. Get him in a car, Damien ordered. Take him to the Mockingbird house. Put him in the basement. I want guards on him 24/7. He doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't see anyone, doesn't breathe without permission. Understand? They understood. Victor was loaded into a car and driven away, hands bound, head down, everything he'd built in 12 years gone in 12 minutes. Damien stood in the parking lot as the cleanup crews went to work. Sirens in the distance. Someone had called the cops, which meant they had maybe 10 minutes before this got complicated. Angela's people would handle it, pay the right people, make the right calls, ensure that whatever official report got filed wouldn't mention names that mattered. Marcus appeared at his shoulder. You good? Yeah, you? Took a round in the vest. Hurts like hell, but nothing's broken. Get it looked at anyway. Will do. Marcus paused. What about the girl, Lena? Damien had almost forgotten about her again. She was still in the safe house with Rosa, waiting for a call that would tell her whether she was free or fucked, whether Damien was alive or dead, whether her life was about to start or end. Let her sit a while longer, he said. I need to deal with Victor first. Get everything he knows. Then we'll figure out what to do with her. And if he doesn't talk? Damien looked at the warehouse, at the blood on the ground, at the evidence of violence that would take days to fully clean up. He'll talk. They always do. It's just a question of how long it takes. They drove back toward the city as night settled in fully, cold and clear and indifferent. Behind them, the warehouse was already being sanitized, evidence removed, stories aligned. By morning, it would just be another quiet building in an industrial district, no different than the dozens around it. But Damien would remember the gunfire and the blood and the look on Victor's face when he realized he'd lost. Would remember that betrayal had a cost, and that cost had been paid in full tonight. The war was over before it had really started. Now came the harder part, making sure everyone knew what happened to people who broke faith, making sure it never happened again. The basement of the Mockingbird safe house had been designed for one purpose, and it wasn't storage. Concrete walls, soundproofing that would muffle a grenade, a drain in the center of the floor that had seen too much use over the years. A single chair bolted to the concrete, one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. No windows, no hope. Victor sat in that chair with his hands still zip-tied behind his back, blood dried on his temple from where someone had been a little too enthusiastic during transport. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without the expensive suit and the confident smile and the whole performance he'd been running for 12 years. Just a man in a basement, waiting for consequences. Damien arrived at midnight. He'd gone home first, changed out of the wedding clothes, taken a shower that had turned the water pink with someone else's blood. Now he wore jeans and a black sweater, nothing fancy, nothing that couldn't be thrown away if it got dirty. Marcus was with him, plus two guys Damien didn't know well, new recruits, early 20s, eager to prove themselves. They'd guard the door and learn what happened to traitors. Victor looked up when Damien entered. His face was pale, eyes red-rimmed from stress or tears or both. "I want a lawyer." Damien almost laughed. "This isn't that kind of conversation." "I have rights." "You had rights. You traded them for ambition and poor planning." Damien pulled up a second chair, sat down facing Victor, close enough to see the fear, far enough to avoid anything stupid. "But I'm not here to hurt you, not yet. I'm here to listen. You're going to tell me everything, and then we're going to decide what happens next. And if I don't, then Marcus takes over, and he's not as patient as I am." Marcus cracked his knuckles, which was theatrical but effective. Victor flinched. "Start talking," Damien said. "Who else was involved? How deep does this go?" Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor, probably running through scenarios in his head, trying to figure out if cooperation would save him or just delay the inevitable. Finally, he looked up, and something in his expression had shifted. Resignation, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Anthony Corso," he said quietly, "from the gambling operations. He was in from the beginning, helped me set up the shell companies, move the money." Damien knew Anthony. Mid-40s, competent, quiet, ran a clean operation, never caused problems. "Who else?" "Teresa Marks. She handles distribution. She was supposed to redirect shipments after we took the warehouses, make sure product kept flowing to our buyers instead of yours." Teresa. Damien had hired her 3 years ago on Victor's recommendation. She'd done good work, always on time, always reliable. He tried to feel betrayed and came up empty, just tired. "Keep going." Victor named 6 more people. Some Damien knew well, some he barely recognized. A driver, 2 warehouse supervisors, an accountant, a lawyer who'd helped structure the offshore accounts. Not half the organization like Victor had claimed in the parking lot, but enough. Enough to hurt. Anyone else? No, that's everyone who knew the whole plan. I had others who were sympathetic, who'd probably have switched sides if we'd succeeded, but they weren't active participants. Names. I don't... Names, Victor. All of them. Everyone who smiled at me while thinking about my funeral. It took another hour to get the complete list. 23 names total. Some active conspirators, most just opportunistic rats who'd have jumped ship given the chance. Damien listened to each one, committed them to memory, made mental notes about who would need to be handled immediately and who could wait. When Victor finally ran out of names, Damien asked the next question. Why? Victor blinked. What? Why'd you do it? You were making good money, had real authority, respect. I trusted you. So why throw it away? Because it wasn't mine. Victor's voice cracked slightly. I ran your operations, made you richer, solved your problems. But it was always yours, your empire, your rules, your decision. I was just hired help. Well-paid hired help, but still. So this was about ego. This was about building something that belonged to me. not being someone's employee for the rest of my life. Damien stood, walked to the wall, leaned against it. The concrete was cold through his sweater. You know what's funny? If you'd come to me 5 years ago and said you wanted to branch out, start your own operation in a different city, I probably would have helped you, given you seed money, connections, advice. We could have been partners instead of enemies. You would have said no. You don't know that. You never asked. I know you, Damien. You don't share. You don't let go. Everything in your territory belongs to you, and you'll kill anyone who tries to take it. Yeah, Damien admitted. I probably would have said no, but you still should have asked. Would have been cleaner than this. He walked back to the chair, sat down again. They were quiet for a while, just two men in a basement thinking about choices and consequences and the distance between what could have been and what was. What happens now? Victor asked. Now you write it all down. Every name, every transaction, every meeting, everything you just told me, plus everything you didn't. I want documentation, Victor, evidence that holds up, because tomorrow night I'm calling a meeting. Everyone who matters is going to be there, and you're going to stand in front of them and confess. You're going to humiliate me. I'm going to make an example of you. There's a difference. And after I confess? Damien didn't answer immediately. He'd been thinking about this question since the parking lot, turning it over in his mind, weighing options. The smart move was to kill Victor. Quick, clean, final. Send the message that betrayal equals death. No exceptions, no appeals. But there was another option, riskier maybe, but potentially more effective. After you disappear, he said finally. Not dead, just gone. Broken. I take everything from you. Money, reputation, connections, hope. I leave you alive as a reminder that there are things worse than death. And every day for the rest of your life, you'll wake up knowing you had it all and threw it away for nothing. Victor stared at him. That's crueler than killing me. I know. That's the point. Marcus brought in a laptop and paper. Victor spent the next 3 hours writing, typing, documenting his own downfall with the kind of detail that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. He laid it all out. The meetings with Mikhail, the shell companies, the bribes, the promises made to co-conspirators, everything. By the time the sun started rising Saturday morning, Damien had enough evidence to bury Victor 100 times over, enough to justify what came next. He left Victor in the basement with guards and drove across town to the other safe house. Rosa met him at the door, looking exhausted but alert. She's asleep, Rosa said quietly. Finally. Took her until about 3 to calm down enough. She doesn't know what happened yet? No. You said not to tell her anything, so I didn't. Damien nodded. I'll wake her. You get some rest. Rosa left and Damien walked into the living room. Lena was on the couch, curled up under a blanket, face peaceful in sleep. For a moment she looked younger than 25. Just a kid who'd gotten caught in machinery too big and too brutal for anyone to navigate safely. He sat in the chair and waited. 5 minutes later, her eyes opened, groggy and confused. Then she saw him and sat up fast, blanket falling away. What happened? The words came out rushed, panicked. I heard... Rosa wouldn't tell me anything, but I heard something on the news about a shooting, and I thought... It's over, Damien said. Victor's done. His coup failed. Nobody's coming to kill you. She processed that. Relief and confusion fighting for space on her face. So I can leave? We need to talk first, about what happens next. He told her the basics, not the details. She didn't need to know about the basement or the interrogation or the bodies at the warehouse, just the outcome. Victor had betrayed him. Damien had stopped it. The threat was neutralized. And the other people? She asked. The ones from the diner, the ones who were meeting with him. Being handled, all of them. What does that mean, handled? Damien met her eyes. It means you don't need to worry about them anymore. That's all you need to know. She hugged herself, pulling her knees up to her chest. So what happens to me? That's what we need to discuss. I told you before, you can't go back to your old life. You know too much. You've seen too much. But I can give you a new one. New name, new city. Enough money to start over somewhere far from here. Somewhere nobody knows your face or your story. And if I say no? There is no no. This isn't optional, Lena. You either take what I'm offering or you become a loose end, and I don't leave loose ends. She was quiet for a long time, staring at nothing, thinking, where would I go? Anywhere you want, within reason. I'd suggest West Coast, Seattle, Portland, maybe San Francisco. Big cities where you can disappear into the crowd. I'll set you up with documents, driver's license, social security card, work history, everything you need to build a legitimate life. Bank account with $50,000 to start. After that, you're on your own. 50,000, she laughed, short and bitter. That's what my life's worth? What it costs to make me disappear? That's what it costs to keep you alive and give you a chance. Whether you take that chance or waste it is up to you. And if I run into someone from here, if someone recognizes me, they won't. Nobody's looking for Lena Cross anymore. As far as anyone knows, you froze to death in that alley a week ago. The girl who leaves here tomorrow will be someone else completely. She was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't bother wiping away. I don't want to be someone else. I want my life back. I want my apartment and my job and my friends and everything that was mine. I know, but that's not an option. I'm sorry. You're not sorry. You don't care. I'm just a problem you're solving. You're right. I don't care. But I'm still offering you a way out. That's more than most people get. She wiped her eyes with the blanket, composed herself with visible effort. When do I have to decide? You don't. The decision's already made. You're leaving tomorrow. Only question is whether you cooperate and make it easy, or whether Marcus has to sedate you and put you on a plane unconscious. Your choice. That's not a choice. It's the only one you've got. He stood to leave. She called after him. Damien? He turned. Do you ever regret it? This life? The violence and the lying and having to sleep with a gun under your pillow? It was a good question, better than she probably knew. He thought about it, really thought about it, tried to find regret somewhere in the last 20 years, and came up mostly empty. No, he said finally. I don't. This is what I'm good at, what I was built for. Regret's a luxury I can't afford. That's sad. Maybe, but it's honest. He left her there and didn't look back. Outside, the city was waking up to a cold Saturday morning. People heading to breakfast, to errands, to normal lives that didn't involve basements and confessions and disappearing witnesses. Damien envied them, briefly. Then the feeling passed. The meeting was set for 8 that evening. Damien spent the day making calls, ensuring everyone who mattered would be there. He rented out the back room of a restaurant in neutral territory, Italian place, family-owned, whose owner owed Damien several favors and knew better than to ask questions. By 7:30, people started arriving. Anthony Corso looking nervous. Teresa Marks trying to hide it. The others Victor had named, all of them probably wondering why they'd been summoned. The ones who weren't involved showed up too, the loyal ones, the ones who'd never even considered betrayal. Damien had invited them all, 37 people total, most of his senior leadership. At 8 sharp, Damien walked in with Marcus and 2 guards dragging Victor between them. Victor looked like hell. They'd cleaned him up, given him fresh clothes, but the defeat was written all over his face. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes. The room went dead silent. Damien stood at the head of the table and waited until he had everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming. I know it's Saturday night, I know this was short notice, but we have business to discuss, important business. Some of you already know what happened last night. Some of you participated, and some of you have no idea why you're here, so let me clarify. He gestured to Victor. This man, who most of you have worked with for years, decided he wanted what was mine. He stole from me. He lied to me. He conspired with our competitors. And last night he tried to take my warehouses by force during Tommy Giacomo's daughter's wedding. It failed, obviously. Murmurs around the room, shock from some, guilt from others. Damien let them process. Victor's going to explain exactly what he did, who helped him, how it was supposed to work, and when he's done, we're going to discuss consequences. Victor, talk. Victor raised his head slowly. His voice when he spoke was barely above a whisper. It started about 8 months ago. He talked for 40 minutes, named every name, described every meeting, every transaction, every promise he'd made to people in this room. Anthony Corso's face went white. Teresa Marks looked like she might throw up. The others who'd been named tried to maintain composure and mostly failed. The ones who hadn't been involved looked angry, betrayed not just by Victor, but by people they'd worked alongside, trusted, considered friends, or at least allies. When Victor finally finished, the room was silent except for someone's ragged breathing. Might have been Anthony. Might have been Teresa. Hard to tell. Damien spoke into that silence. Everyone who was named, stand up. 8 people stood, slowly, reluctantly, like they were climbing scaffolds. You have 2 options, Damien said calmly. Option 1, you return everything you took, every dollar, every favor, every piece of leverage. You resign from your positions. You leave the city within 72 hours and you never come back. You do that, you live. You get to start over somewhere else, same as Victor here. And option 2? Anthony's voice shook. Option 2 is I make an example of you the way I should probably make an example of Victor. Bodies in the river. Families asking questions nobody answers. I'd prefer option 1, cleaner. But I'll do option 2 if that's what it takes to make the point. No one spoke. You have until Monday morning to decide. Anyone who doesn't leave by then, I'll assume has chosen option 2. Meeting adjourned for those who were named. The rest of you stay. The 8 filed out like mourners at a funeral. Their own, probably. When they were gone, Damien addressed the remaining 29. I want to be very clear about something. What happened here, this betrayal, this attempted coup, it happened because I got complacent. I trusted when I should have verified. I assumed loyalty instead of ensuring it. That's on me. I own that failure. He let that settle. But going forward, things change. We're tightening operations, more oversight, more accountability. And anyone who even thinks about pulling what Victor tried, they should know it won't end with exile. It'll end with the kind of disappearance that doesn't leave questions because there's nothing left to question. Are we clear? Nods around the room, some enthusiastic, some scared, all of them understanding. Good. Now let's talk about restructuring. We've got 8 vacancies to fill as of Monday. I need recommendations for replacements. People we can trust. People who understand that loyalty isn't optional, it's the price of admission. They spent 2 hours going over organizational charts, discussing candidates, realigning territories. Business as usual, except for the undercurrent of fear that made everyone extra careful with their words. By the time the meeting ended, it was past 11. People filed out quietly, speaking in hushed tones, probably headed to bars or homes where they'd process what they'd witnessed. The old guard being purged, the price of ambition laid bare. Damien stayed until everyone was gone except Marcus and the 2 guards still holding Victor. What do you want us to do with him? Marcus asked. Damien looked at Victor, this man he'd trusted for 12 years. This man who'd shared his table and his secrets and his vision for what the Empire could be. Tried to find anger and found only exhaustion. Take him to the city limits, give him $500 and a bus ticket, drop him at the station. After that, he's not our problem. Victor's head snapped up. You're letting me go? I'm exiling you. There's a difference. You're alive because killing you would be too easy. You get to live knowing you had everything and lost it. You get to start over at the bottom with nothing, and every day for the rest of your life you'll remember that you did this to yourself. Damien, we're done, Victor. You don't exist to me anymore. Guards, get him out of here. They dragged him out, still trying to speak, still trying to find words that would change the outcome. The door closed behind them, and Damien was alone with Marcus. You really just letting him walk? Marcus asked. For now. I've got people who'll keep tabs on him. Make sure he actually leaves. Make sure he doesn't try anything stupid. But yeah, he walks. A lot of people would call that weak. A lot of people aren't holding this empire together. I make the calls. I live with the consequences. Marcus nodded slowly. What about the girl? Lena? She leaves tomorrow. I've got a handler taking her to the airport. New documents, new name, plane ticket to Portland. After that, she's on her own. You trust her to stay quiet? I trust her to be smart enough to know that talking gets her killed. Beyond that? Damien shrugged. We'll see. They left the restaurant and drove through the city one more time. The streets looked different now, cleaner somehow, like a wound that had been lanced and was finally starting to heal. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Hard to tell the difference sometimes between progress and just continued survival. At his apartment, Damien poured himself a drink and stood at the window looking out at the city he controlled, the empire he'd built, the territory he'd defended. It looked the same as it always had. Lights and shadows, and the endless sprawl of concrete and ambition. But something had shifted. Some fundamental understanding about the cost of power and the price of trust. Victor had taught him that lesson the hard way. Others before him had tried and failed. This time, at least, Damien had been smart enough to see it coming. Smart enough to stop it. Next time might be different. He finished his drink and went to bed with his gun on the nightstand and his phone within reach. Same as every night. Same as it had been for 20 years. Same as it would be until someone finally got lucky, or he got slow, or the universe decided it was done with him. Outside, the city continued its endless cycle. Deals being made, violence being planned, ambition breeding desperation. The machine turning, grinding, consuming everyone who got too close. Damien Voss had survived another day. Tomorrow he'd wake up and do it again. That was the job. That was the life. That was all there was. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of pale winter sun that promised nothing and delivered less. Damien woke at 6 out of habit, showered, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a plain shirt, leather jacket that had seen better years. Today wasn't about power or intimidation. Today was about closing doors. Lena's flight was at noon. He'd arranged for a handler named Patricia to take her to the airport. Middle-aged woman, former social worker, good at making people feel safe, even when they weren't. Patricia had done this before, shepherding witnesses and problems onto planes bound for distant cities where they could become someone else's concern or no one's at all. Damien arrived at the Mockingbird safe house at 8. Rosa was already gone, reassigned to other duties. Patricia was in the kitchen making coffee that smelled better than it would taste, and Lena sat on the same couch she'd been occupying for a week, wearing new clothes that didn't quite fit right, jeans too loose, sweater too big. Everything selected to be forgettable. She looked up when he walked in. The fear from yesterday had been replaced by something harder to read, not acceptance exactly, more like resignation wearing a defiant mask. "Morning," she said. "Morning. You ready? Does it matter if I'm not?" "No, but it might make the next few hours easier if you are." She stood, grabbed a small duffel bag that Patricia had packed for her. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not having a choice, about this being the only way. And you're right. I hate that you're right, but you are. Going back to my old life would get me killed. Staying here would get me killed. This is the only option that doesn't end with me in the ground." She paused. "But I want you to know something. I didn't ask for any of this. I was just trying to survive, same as everyone else. And you saved me, but you also ruined me. So I don't owe you gratitude. I don't owe you anything except maybe a goodbye." Damien almost smiled. There was that spine again, the one she'd been hiding under layers of fear and shock. "Fair enough. Goodbye, Lena Cross. Hope Portland treats you better than this city did." "Who's Lena Cross?" She held up a driver's license Patricia had given her. The photo was hers, but the name read Sarah Mitchell. 26 years old. Address in Portland that probably existed in some database somewhere. "She died in an alley a week ago, remember? I'm someone else now." "Then goodbye, Sarah Mitchell. Try not to get mixed up with criminals in your next life." "I'll do my best." Patricia appeared with a travel mug of coffee and an envelope thick with cash, walking around money until the bank account cleared. "We should go. Traffic on the highway's getting heavy." Lena, Sarah now, had to start thinking of her that way, took the envelope without looking inside. "One question before I go. Victor, what's going to happen to him?" "He's gone. Exiled. As of last night, he doesn't exist in this city anymore." "That's it? After everything he did, you just let him walk?" "Death would have been easier for him. This way he gets to live with what he lost. That's worse." She considered that. "Maybe you're more cruel than I thought." "Maybe I am." They stood there for a moment, two people whose lives had intersected by accident and would now diverge by design. Damien wondered briefly if she'd make it, if she'd actually build a new life in Portland, or if the weight of what she'd seen would drag her down eventually. Impossible to know. People surprised you sometimes. "Thank you," she said finally, quiet, reluctant, "for not killing me. I know that was an option. It was. Still is, technically, but I don't think it'll come to that. Why not? Because you're smart enough to know that talking gets you nothing but dead. And survival's what you're good at. You proved that by lasting this long. She nodded once, then turned and walked out with Patricia. Didn't look back. Smart. Looking back was how you tripped, how you second-guessed, how you ended up frozen instead of moving forward. Damien watched through the window as they got into Patricia's car, plain sedan, nothing memorable, and drove away. The street swallowed them within seconds, and then it was like they'd never been there at all. He stood in the empty safe house for a few minutes, listening to the silence. This place had served its purpose. Now it was just another property, another asset on a spreadsheet somewhere. He'd have it cleaned professionally, restocked, prepared for the next crisis that required discretion. Always another crisis. Always another problem. His phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. Need you at the office. Something came up. Damien locked the safe house and drove across town thinking about loose ends and how they never really stayed tied. You could knot them, cut them, burn them, but somehow they always found a way to unravel when you weren't looking. The office was quiet on a Sunday. Most of the staff gone, just skeleton crew keeping watch over an empire that never actually slept. Marcus met him in the lobby, looking grim. What happened? Anthony Corso. He didn't take option one. But Damien felt something cold settle in his stomach. He ran? Worse, he went to the FBI. They took the elevator up in silence. In the office, Marcus pulled up security footage on his laptop, time-stamped from 3 hours ago, showing Anthony walking into the federal building downtown. He was inside for 90 minutes. Then he walked out with 2 agents, got into their car, and drove away. Witness protection, Damien said. It wasn't a question. Most likely. He's giving them everything he knows in exchange for a new life. Same deal you offered, but with federal backing instead of your word. Damien sat down, tried to think through implications. Anthony knew a lot. Not everything. Damien had always been careful about compartmentalization, but enough. Enough to cause problems. Enough to bring indictments, investigations, maybe even prosecutions if they got lucky and built a case that stuck. How bad? Marcus pulled up a file. He knows about the gambling operations, obviously. That's his territory. He knows some of the money laundering channels we used for the construction business. He knows names, not all of them, but enough to start dominoes falling. And he knows about Friday night. He participated in the coup. That makes him as guilty as Victor. Yeah, but he's got immunity now. Or will have once the deal's finalized. He can testify about his own crimes and walk free as long as he gives them bigger fish. How big? You're the biggest fish there is, Damien. He's coming after you. The room was quiet, except for the hum of electronics and the city noise filtering through triple-paned glass. Damien thought about Anthony, nervous little man who ran numbers and took percentages and never seemed ambitious enough to be dangerous. Turned out ambition wasn't the only thing that made people dangerous. Fear worked just as well. What are our options, he asked. Marcus closed the laptop. Limited. We can't touch him now. Not while he's in federal custody. Even if we could, killing him would just prove everything he's saying, make him a martyr instead of a rat. So we wait for the indictment. Catherine Walsh is already working on it. She's reaching out to her contacts at the DOJ, trying to figure out how strong their case is, how much Anthony actually gave them. But it's going to take time. How much time? Weeks, maybe months. Federal investigations move slow when they're being careful, and they'll be careful with this one. You're not some street dealer they can scoop up on a Friday afternoon. You're connected. You're rich. You've got lawyers and politicians and legitimate businesses creating smokescreens. They'll want everything airtight before they move. Damien stood, walked to the window. The city spread out below him, indifferent and eternal. He'd built an empire in this city, controlled it for 20 years. Now one nervous accountant with immunity was threatening to tear it all down. Start preparing, he said. Move the money. Clean the books. Sever any connection between legitimate operations and everything else. I want firewalls built so high that even if they prove I'm dirty, they can't touch anything that matters. That's going to take, I don't care what it takes. Do it. And Marcus? Start reaching out to everyone who might flip. Everyone who knows anything. Remind them what happens to people who talk to federal agents. Gently, carefully, but remind them. You want me to threaten them? I want you to remind them of reality. The FBI offers protection until the trial's over. After that, they're on their own, and we have very long memories. Marcus nodded slowly. What about the ones who are loyal? The ones who weren't involved in Victor's mess? Reward them. Bonuses, promotions, increased territory. Show them that loyalty pays better than betrayal. Create incentive structure that makes cooperation with feds financially stupid. You're bribing people to stay quiet. I'm investing in organizational stability. There's a difference. They spent the rest of the day implementing damage control. Phone calls to lawyers, accountants, business managers. Quiet conversations with people who needed to understand that the landscape had shifted and their survival depended on adapting quickly. Most of them got it. Some of them would need additional convincing. That was Marcus's department. By evening, Damien was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. It was the bone-deep fatigue that came from holding an empire together through sheer force of will while everything tried to pull it apart. He went home, poured a drink, sat in his chair watching the city lights come on one by one. His phone rang. Catherine Walsh. "Tell me something good," he said by way of greeting. Anthony Corso gave them enough for a warrant. They're building a RICO case, racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy. They're going after the whole organization, not just you personally. Timeline? 6 months minimum, maybe a year. They'll want to flip more people, gather more evidence, make sure they've got overwhelming force before they move. But Damien, this is serious. RICO charges stick. If they prove even half of what Anthony's probably telling them, you're looking at 20 years minimum. So we fight it. We fight it. I've already got a team assembling, best criminal defense attorneys in the country. But I need to be honest with you, our chances aren't great. Not if they've got insider testimony and documentation. The feds don't bring RICO cases unless they're confident they can win. Then we make them less confident. Find holes in Anthony's testimony. Discredit him as a witness. He participated in Victor's coup. He's a criminal himself. That has to count for something. It does. We'll use it. But it might not be enough. Then find something that is enough. That's what I pay you for. He hung up before she could respond. Sat there in the dark thinking about choices and consequences and the fact that 20 years of careful planning could be undone by one man's fear and the federal government's desire to make an example. The next 6 months were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Catherine Walsh and her team built a defense that could stop a freight train. They found inconsistencies in Anthony's timeline, questioned his motives, pointed out that he was a confessed criminal who'd only come forward after being caught. They filed motion after motion, dragged out every procedural delay available, made the federal prosecutors work for every inch of progress. Meanwhile, Damien restructured the empire, sold off the riskiest operations, transferred ownership of questionable assets to shell companies so far removed from his name that connecting them would require detective work that bordered on archaeological, legitimized everything that could be legitimized, shut down everything that couldn't. The gambling operations went first. Too visible, too easy to prove. He sold them to a consortium in Atlantic City and took a loss rather than risk the exposure. The money laundering through construction, that got more complicated. He brought in consultants who specialized in corporate restructuring and had them create enough paperwork to bury Manhattan. By the time they were done, the construction business looked clean enough to pass any audit. The truly dirty stuff, the drugs, the weapons, the things you couldn't legitimize, no matter how many lawyers you hired, that he transferred to people he trusted, or more accurately, people whose survival depended on his survival. If he went down, they'd go down with him. That created alignment of interests stronger than loyalty. Through it all, he kept the organization running, kept money flowing, kept territories secure, kept people in line. It was exhausting and relentless, and there were days he seriously considered just walking away, disappearing to some country without extradition, and letting the whole thing collapse behind him. But that wasn't who he was. He'd built this. It was his. And he'd be damned if he let the federal government take it without a fight. The indictment came down in July. 14 counts. Racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, wire fraud. The prosecutor had a press conference where she stood in front of cameras and talked about organized crime and public safety and how no one was above the law. Damien watched it from his lawyer's office, stone-faced, already planning the counterattack. Trial was set for October. That gave them 3 months to prepare, to strategize, to find any possible advantage. Catherine Walsh assembled a dream team, 8 lawyers, each one a specialist in their particular aspect of criminal defense. They cost a fortune collectively. Damien didn't care. This wasn't about money. This was about survival. The prosecution's case was strong. Anthony Corso testified for 3 days, laying out the organization's structure, the money flows, the illegal activities. He was a good witness, nervous enough to seem honest, detailed enough to be credible. The jury ate it up. But Catherine had been right about the holes. Anthony's timeline didn't match phone records. His testimony about certain transactions contradicted documentation. And most importantly, Anthony himself was a confessed criminal who'd participated in conspiracy to commit violent crimes. Everything he said had to be viewed through that lens. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Damien sat through every minute of it, watching his life dissected in front of strangers who'd decide his fate based on reasonable doubt and legal technicalities. Some days it looked good. Some days it looked hopeless. Most days it was impossible to tell. On the 42nd day, the jury went out to deliberate. They were gone for 4 days, long enough that both sides started getting nervous, long enough that speculation ran wild. When they finally came back, Damien was in the courtroom with Marcus on one side and Catherine on the other. The jury foreman stood, older woman, looked like someone's grandmother, and read the verdict. Not guilty on counts 1 through 7. Guilty on counts 8 through 10. Not guilty on the rest. 3 convictions out of 14. The money laundering charges, specifically. Catherine had warned him those were the strongest, the ones with the most documentation. The judge set sentencing for 2 months out and remanded Damien to custody pending that hearing. He spent those 2 months in a federal holding facility that was cleaner than it should have been and more boring than prison had any right to be. Catherine visited weekly with updates on appeals, on sentencing recommendations, on the various deals prosecutors were still trying to offer if he'd cooperate with ongoing investigations. He turned them all down. Cooperation meant naming names, burning people who'd stayed loyal, destroying what was left of the organization. That wasn't an option, never had been. Sentencing day arrived in December. Back to the same courtroom, same judge, different outcome. The prosecution asked for 20 years. Catherine argued for 5. They settled on 12 with possibility of parole after 8. 12 years. Damien would be in his 60s when he got out. The empire would be gone, reformed under new leadership or cannibalized by competitors. Everything he'd built would belong to someone else. The judge banged her gavel, and it was done. Marcus visited him the night before the transfer to federal prison. They sat across from each other in a room designed for lawyers and clients, speaking in low tones about the future. "The organization's holding," Marcus said. "I've been running things the way you set it up. David's handling the money. Angela's still got intelligence locked down. It's not the same without you, but it's not falling apart either." "Good. Keep it that way. And Marcus, don't try to bust me out. Don't try anything stupid that gets you killed or locked up. Just run the business. When I get out, if I get out, I'll decide what comes next." "You're really going to serve the full sentence?" "I'm going to serve until parole or until I figure out a legal way out. But I'm not running. I'm not cooperating. I'm taking the hit and moving forward." "Why? You could cut a deal. Walk in 5 years if you gave them what they want. And spend the rest of my life knowing I broke. Knowing I turned on people who trusted me. That's not who I am, Marcus. I'd rather do the time." But Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You know what Victor's doing?" "No, don't care. He's working construction in Arizona, living in a studio apartment, barely making rent. I've got people watching him. He looks miserable." "Good. You really think that's worse than death? For him?" "Yeah. Victor wanted empire, wanted power, wanted respect. Now he's got nothing. That'll eat him alive slower than a bullet." They talked for another hour about logistics, about contingencies, about what to do if things went wrong. Then visiting hours ended and Marcus left and Damien was alone with the reality of 12 years stretching ahead of him like a prison sentence. Which it was. The transfer happened the next morning. Federal prison in Pennsylvania, medium security, the kind of place that warehoused white-collar criminals and nonviolent offenders. Damien got processed. Strip search, fingerprints, the whole humiliating ritual, and assigned to a cell with a roommate who turned out to be an embezzler from New Jersey. "What are you in for?" the guy asked. "Money laundering." "How much?" "Enough." They left it at that. Prison was exactly as boring as Damien expected and marginally more tolerable than he'd feared. He kept his head down, didn't make enemies, didn't try to run anything. Just existed, read books, worked out, counted days. 8 years passed that way. 8 years of routine and monotony, and slowly accepting that the empire he'd built had moved on without him. Marcus sent updates through Catherine. The organization was stable, profitable, evolving. New leadership had emerged, younger guys who'd proven themselves. The landscape had changed, but the machine still functioned. On the morning of his parole hearing, Damien was 56 years old and looked older. Gray at the temples had turned to mostly gray everywhere, lines on his face that hadn't been there before. But the eyes were the same, still calculating, still cold when they needed to be. The parole board asked him the usual questions. Was he rehabilitated? Did he understand the severity of his crimes? What were his plans upon release? He answered honestly. No, he didn't feel rehabilitated because rehabilitation implied he'd been broken. He understood his crimes had consequences, and he'd accepted those consequences. His plans were to reintegrate into society, find legitimate work, stay out of trouble. They believed maybe half of it. But he'd served his time, been a model prisoner, and the system had a vested interest in clearing bed space. Parole was granted conditional on regular check-ins and maintaining employment. He walked out of prison on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Marcus was waiting in the parking lot, older too, grayer, but still solid as concrete. "Welcome back," Marcus said. "Good to be back." Mostly. They drove away from the prison, away from Pennsylvania, back toward the city that Damien had once owned and no longer recognized. The skyline had changed. New buildings, new developments, new money moving into old neighborhoods. 8 years was a geological age in city terms. "You want to know about the organization?" Marcus asked. "Not yet. First, I want coffee that doesn't taste like dirt and a shower that has actual water pressure. Then we'll talk business." Marcus nodded and drove in silence. 3 days later, Damien sat in a diner, not Joe's, somewhere else, somewhere new, and listened while Marcus laid out the current state of things. The organization had survived, evolved. Leadership had changed hands. David Lee ran financial operations. Angela Reyes controlled intelligence. A guy named Vincent Chen, who'd been mid-level when Damien went in, now ran enforcement. "And you?" Damien asked. "I'm advisor. They listened to me because I was with you, but it's not my organization anymore, it's theirs. As it should be. 8 years is too long to keep a throne warm. So what are you going to do?" Damien thought about it. He'd had 8 years to think, to plan, to decide what came after. "I'm going to consult, help when they ask for it, stay out of the way when they don't. I'm too old to run Empire again, Marcus. That's young man's work. I had my time." "Just like that? You're walking away?" "I'm not walking away. I'm accepting reality. The city moved on. The organization moved on. I should too." Marcus looked skeptical but didn't argue. They finished their coffee and went their separate ways. Damien spent the next year slowly reintegrating. He bought a small apartment, nothing fancy, just clean and quiet. Got a job consulting for a legitimate security firm, helping them design protocols and assess vulnerabilities. The work was boring but legal. He met with his parole officer twice a month, passed his drug tests, stayed out of trouble. Sometimes he'd see news stories about organized crime in the city. Arrests, investigations, the same cycle he'd once been part of. The names were different, but the game was the same. He'd watch and feel nothing. Not nostalgia, not regret, just distance. One evening in November, 2 years after his release, he got a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Voss?" Female voice, vaguely familiar. "Who's asking?" "It's Sarah Mitchell. Used to be Lena Cross." He nearly dropped the phone. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "Yeah, well, I didn't expect a call, but I figured you'd want to know. I made it. Portland's good. I've got a job, friends, an actual life. It took time, but I'm okay. I'm glad. You deserved a second chance." "So did you, apparently. I read about the trial, the sentence. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I made my choices, same as you made yours. They were quiet for a moment, two people whose lives had intersected violently and briefly, now just strangers catching up. Why are you calling, Sarah? To say thank you. I know I said I didn't owe you anything, and maybe I don't, but you could have killed me and you didn't. That counts for something. You're welcome. And also to say I'm sorry about Anthony, about him going to the FBI. I know that wasn't your fault, but I still feel like I was the start of all of it. If I hadn't overheard those conversations, then Victor would have found another way, another witness, another mistake. It was inevitable. You just accelerated the timeline. Does that make it better? It makes it what it is. Neither of us can change it now. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. Then she said goodbye and hung up, and Damien sat there in his quiet apartment thinking about consequences and redemption and whether either one actually mattered. His phone rang again, Marcus this time. You watching the news? No, why? Turn it on, Channel 7. Damien found the remote, clicked on the TV. A reporter standing in front of a warehouse, one of the old ones, probably North Side territory. Police lights flashing behind her, in what authorities are calling one of the largest organized crime busts in the city's history. Federal agents arrested 15 people this morning on charges ranging from racketeering to drug trafficking. Among those arrested was Victor Hale, who authorities say had returned to the city in violation of a previous exile agreement. Damien watched as they showed footage of Victor being let out in handcuffs. He looked terrible, older, beaten down, desperate. Looked like a man who'd tried to climb back to the top and found only the bottom waiting. He came back, Marcus said over the phone. 6 months ago. Started trying to rebuild. Thought enough time had passed that people would forget. Stupid. Very. He reached out to some of Anthony Corso's old contacts. Didn't realize they were all informants now. Walked right into a federal trap. How long's he looking at? 25 years minimum. He's 53. He'll die in prison. Damien turned off the TV. Felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the same distance he'd felt about everything lately. Everyone gets what they deserve eventually. You believe that? I believe consequences catch up. Whether that's the same as deserving them, I don't know. They hung up. Damien sat in the dark apartment listening to the city sounds filtering through the window. Sirens, traffic, life, continuing in its endless cycle. Victor had come back and been destroyed. Anthony had testified and disappeared into witness protection. Sarah had rebuilt. Marcus had adapted. The organization had survived. And Damien? Damien had done his time, paid his price, and come out the other side different. Not better necessarily. Not worse. Just different. He thought about the girl in the alley, the one he'd saved not out of mercy, but out of principle. Thought about how that one decision had cascaded into everything that followed. The investigation, the betrayal exposed, the trial, the sentence. All of it traceable back to the moment he'd cut her loose instead of walking away. Would he make the same choice again, knowing everything it would cost? Probably. Because that was who he was. Someone who believed in order over chaos, in consequences over compromise, in the idea that even in darkness there had to be rules. The city outside continued its rhythm. Damien Voss, no longer the feared crime boss who'd once ruled it, just another citizen now, sat in his apartment and accepted that his empire had been reduced to memory. But memory was stronger than people thought. It endured when empires fell. It survived when power faded. And somewhere in this city, people still remembered the name Damien Voss and what it had meant. That would have to be enough. He poured himself a drink, scotch, decent but not expensive, and toasted the empty apartment, to survival, to consequences, to the strange justice of a universe that punished betrayal and rewarded nothing but occasionally allowed redemption. Outside, winter was settling in again, the same cold that had been there the night he found Lena Cross in that alley, the same cold that would be there long after everyone in this story was gone. The city didn't care about empires or exiles or second chances. It just kept turning, kept consuming, kept offering opportunities to anyone brave or stupid enough to take them. Damien had taken his, had built something real from nothing, had defended it, lost it, survived its loss. Now he was just a man in an apartment, drinking alone, thinking about choices. It was enough. It had to be. The glass was empty. He didn't refill it. Tomorrow he'd wake up and go to work and meet with his parole officer and live the quiet life that came after everything else. Tonight he'd sit here and remember what it had been like to matter, to have power, to make decisions that changed lives. And when morning came, he'd let it go, finally, completely. The story was over. All that remained was living with how it ended. Damien Voss had survived. That was victory enough.